More than half a century has passed since humans last walked upon the lunar surface. The footprints left by Apollo astronauts remain undisturbed, preserved in the airless stillness of the moon. Now, through the Artemis program, humanity prepares to return, not for a brief visit, but to stay, to build, and to venture even further into the cosmos. This is the story of how we're going back to the moon. The moon has always been there, hanging in our night sky like a silver promise. For most of human history, it remained impossibly distant, a celestial body we could observe, but never touch. Then came the space age, and with it, one of humanity's most extraordinary achievements. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 American astronauts walked on the moon as part of the Apollo program. It was an era of bold ambition, driven by Cold War competition and fueled by seemingly unlimited national will. The first landing, Apollo 11, captured the world's imagination in a way few events ever have. Neil Armstrong's first steps onto the lunar surface on July 20th, 1969, represented not just an American triumph, but a human one. We had reached beyond our planet and touched another world. The Apollo missions that followed expanded our exploration. Apollo 12 landed with precision near an old robotic surveyor spacecraft. Apollo 14 saw Alan Shepard hit golf balls across the lunar surface. Apollo 15, 16 and 17 brought lunar rovers, allowing astronauts to travel several miles from their landing sites. They collected rocks, set up scientific instruments, took thousands of photographs, and expanded our understanding of Earth's companion in space. Then, abruptly, it ended. Apollo 17, launched in December 1972, was the last time humans travelled beyond low Earth orbit. Commander Eugene Cernan became the last person to leave footprints on the moon. As he climbed back into the lunar module, he spoke words that would prove prophetic. We leave as we came, and God willing as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind. But the return didn't happen. Not for decades. The reasons were complex, woven from political, economic, and cultural threads. The space race that had propelled Apollo was essentially over. The Soviet Union never successfully developed the technology to send cosmonauts to the moon, and without that competitive pressure, public and political enthusiasm for lunar exploration waned. The missions were extraordinarily expensive, each costing billions in today's currency. In an era of social upheaval, economic challenges, and the Vietnam War, many questioned whether such expenditures were justified. NASA's focus shifted. The agency developed the Space Shuttle, a reusable spacecraft designed for more routine access to low Earth orbit. Plans moved forward for space stations, first Skylab, then eventually the International Space Station. These were important achievements, expanding our capabilities in space and enabling long-duration human spaceflight. But they kept astronauts close to home, circling Earth at an altitude of just a few hundred miles. The technology to return to the moon existed. The rockets, though, were gone. The Saturn V, the colossal launch vehicle that had carried Apollo to the moon, ceased production. The factories were retooled, the workforce dispersed, the specialized knowledge gradually lost to retirement and time. By the 1980s and 90s, returning to the moon would have required essentially starting from scratch, rebuilding capabilities that had been deliberately dismantled. There were plans, of course. President George H.W. Bush announced a space exploration initiative in 1989, calling for a return to the moon and eventual missions to Mars. The proposal died in Congress, deemed too expensive. In 2004, President George W. Bush announced the Constellation program, which aimed to develop new spacecraft and rockets to return astronauts to the moon by 2020. Constellation made progress, designing the Orion crew capsule and the Ares rockets, but it too faced budget constraints. and technical challenges. In 2010, President Barack Obama cancelled Constellation, arguing that returning to the moon wasn't ambitious enough and that NASA should focus on asteroids and eventually Mars. The decision was controversial, particularly since billions had already been spent on Constellation hardware. Some elements, notably the Orion spacecraft, were preserved and repurposed. But once again, the moon receded into the future. Meanwhile, other nations grew interested. China launched a series of increasingly sophisticated robotic lunar missions, including rovers that successfully operated on the lunar surface. They announced plans to send taikonauts to the moon. India, Japan, and Europe also pursued lunar exploration through robotic missions. Private companies, particularly SpaceX, began revolutionizing access to space with reusable rockets and ambitious visions of interplanetary travel. By the middle of the 2010s, the landscape had shifted. Lunar water ice, particularly in permanently shadowed craters near the poles, was confirmed through orbital observations. This changed the calculus of lunar exploration. Water on the moon could be split into hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel, or used to support human habitation. The moon transformed from a destination visited briefly and abandoned into a potential resource base for deeper space exploration. The moon also took on strategic importance, with multiple nations capable of reaching it and with China explicitly pursuing human lunar missions. A new space race was emerging. This time, though, it wouldn't be purely about national prestige. It would be about establishing presence, demonstrating capabilities, and potentially accessing resources. The Apollo missions had proven we could reach the moon. What we hadn't proven was that we could stay, that we could build something sustainable beyond Earth. That would require different technology, different approaches, and a different level of international cooperation. It would require not just visiting the moon, but returning to it in a way that would last. This is where Artemis begins. Named after Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology, the lunar goddess who could light the night, the Artemis program represents a new chapter in human space exploration. It builds on Apollo's legacy while aiming for something Apollo never attempted: permanent human presence beyond low Earth orbit. The seeds of Artemis were planted in the wreckage of previous programs. When Constellation was cancelled in 2010, not everything was discarded. The Orion crew capsule, despite its troubled development, represented years of engineering work and billions of dollars of investment. Congress directed NASA to continue its development as a multi-purpose crew vehicle. Similarly, lawmakers mandated the creation of a heavy-lift rocket that could carry crew and cargo beyond low Earth orbit. These mandates, enshrined in the NASA Authorization Act of 2010, provided the foundation. NASA would develop the Space Launch System, or SLS, a massive rocket using technology derived from the Space Shuttle combined with modern engineering. Orion would be the spacecraft that carried astronauts. Together, they would enable deep space exploration, though exactly where they would go remained somewhat undefined. For several years, the program existed in a kind of limbo. The Obama administration pushed for missions to asteroids, particularly a proposal to capture a small asteroid and bring it to lunar orbit, where astronauts could visit it. The Asteroid Redirect mission, as it was called, never gained much traction. Critics questioned its value, and the public never embraced the concept. Meanwhile, SLS and Orion development continued, facing delays and budget overruns that drew congressional scrutiny. Then came 2017 and a change in administration. President Donald Trump issued Space Policy Directive 1 in December of that year, redirecting NASA's focus back to the moon. The directive called for a campaign of robotic missions to the lunar surface, followed by long-term human exploration of the moon, and eventually human missions to Mars. It was a return to the Constellation program's basic vision, but with the hardware now much further along in development. The program needed a name. Internal discussions at NASA led to Artemis, chosen for its mythological connection to Apollo. In Greek mythology, Artemis was Apollo's twin sister, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. The name carried symbolic weight. Apollo had been 12 men, all Americans. Artemis would be diverse, international, and would include the first woman and first person of colour to walk on the lunar surface. Where Apollo had planted flags and returned home, Artemis would establish infrastructure for sustained exploration. The initial timeline was aggressive, perhaps unrealistically so. In March 2019, Vice President Mike Pence announced that NASA would land astronauts on the Moon by 2024, cutting years from the previous schedule. This ambitious goal drove urgency into the program, but also created challenges. Accelerating development while maintaining safety and reliability is difficult in the best circumstances. In the complex world of spaceflight, it proved nearly impossible. The Artemis architecture began to take shape. Unlike Apollo, which relied on a single massive rocket to send everything to the moon at once, Artemis would be more modular. The SLS would launch the Orion spacecraft with its crew. A separate commercial human landing system would be waiting in lunar orbit to ferry astronauts to and from the surface. Eventually, a small space station called Gateway would be established in lunar orbit, serving as a staging point and research platform. The program faced scrutiny from multiple directions. Some space advocates, including Mars Society founder Robert Zubrin and former astronaut Buzz Aldrin, criticised Gateway as an unnecessary complication that would delay lunar landings. Others questioned the cost of the SLS, which carried an estimated price tag of over $4 billion per launch, when development costs were included. Still others worried about the timeline, arguing that rushing could compromise safety. Despite criticisms, momentum built. In April 2021, NASA selected SpaceX to develop the first human landing system, a version of their Starship vehicle modified for lunar operations. This was controversial, as Blue Origin and Dynetics had also competed for the contract. Blue Origin protested the decision, leading to delays, but ultimately, SpaceX moved forward. In May 2023, NASA awarded a second contract to Blue Origin for an alternative lander system, ensuring redundancy and competition. The Biden administration, taking office in 2021, affirmed its commitment to Artemis, while acknowledging that the 2024 landing deadline wasn't achievable. The date slipped to 2025, then 2026, and eventually to mid-2027 in official NASA timelines. These delays, frustrating though they were, reflected the reality of developing complex systems that must work reliably in the unforgiving environment of space. Artemis grew into a truly international endeavour. The European Space Agency committed to providing service modules for Orion and contributions to Gateway. Canada would supply the robotic systems for Gateway, including the advanced Canadarm3. Japan pledged habitation elements and logistics support. Commercial companies were engaged through the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, which would send robotic landers to the Moon to scout sites and test technologies. The Artemis Accords, introduced in 2020, provided a framework for international cooperation in lunar exploration. Based on the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, the Accords established principles for peaceful exploration, transparency, interoperability, and the protection of heritage sites like the Apollo landing locations. By late 2025, more than 50 countries had signed the Accords, creating the broadest coalition ever assembled for space exploration. What distinguished Artemis from Apollo wasn't just technology or international cooperation. It was the fundamental goal: Apollo had been about reaching the moon, proving it could be done, and winning the space race. Artemis is about learning to live and work on the moon, developing the technologies and operational experience that could enable humans to become a truly spacefaring species. The moon is the testing ground, the place where we learn whether long-term exploration beyond Earth is possible. This shift in purpose shapes every aspect of the program. Landing sites are chosen not just for safety and scientific interest, but for access to resources like water ice. Mission durations are measured in days rather than hours. Systems are designed for reusability and sustainability rather than single-use perfection. Artemis isn't the end of a journey. It's the beginning of one that could extend to Mars and beyond. Standing on Launch Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center, the Space Launch System is difficult to comprehend. It rises over 300 feet into the Florida sky, a tower of metal and propellant that weighs millions of pounds. When fully fueled, it contains enough liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen to fill dozens of Olympic swimming pools. This is the rocket that will carry Artemis to the moon, the most powerful launch vehicle NASA has ever built. The SLS is, in many ways, an evolution of the space shuttle. This isn't accidental. When Congress mandated the development of a heavy-lift rocket in 2010, they specified that NASA should use existing hardware and technology, where possible, to control costs and accelerate development. The space shuttle had flown 135 missions over 3 decades, and much of its technology was proven and reliable. SLS would adapt and enhance that technology for deep space missions. The core stage, the rocket's central structure, is the largest component. Built by Boeing at NASA's Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, it stands over 200 feet tall with a diameter of 27.6 feet. This makes it the largest rocket stage NASA has ever constructed. Inside are 2 massive tanks, one holding 733,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen, the other containing 196,000 gallons of liquid oxygen. These supercooled propellants must be maintained at extraordinarily low temperatures, negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit for the hydrogen, negative 297 for the oxygen. 4 RS-25 engines cluster at the base of the core stage. These engines are remarkable pieces of engineering, among the most complex rocket engines ever developed. Originally designed for the space shuttle, where they were recovered after each flight and refurbished for reuse, the engines have been modified for the more demanding requirements of deep space missions. Each RS-25 generates over 400,000 pounds of thrust at sea level, increasing to more than 500,000 pounds in the vacuum of space. Together, the 4 engines produce nearly 2 million pounds of thrust. The RS-25 is a staged combustion cycle engine, which means it squeezes every bit of performance from its propellants. Liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen are combined in a pre-burner at extremely high pressure, creating a hydrogen-rich hot gas that drives turbopumps before entering the main combustion chamber. This complexity makes the engine incredibly efficient, with a specific impulse of over 450 seconds. In simpler terms, it produces more thrust per pound of propellant than almost any other rocket engine. But the core stage alone isn't enough. To achieve the thrust needed to escape Earth's gravity with the weight of Orion and its payload, SLS uses 2 solid rocket boosters. These are the most powerful solid rocket motors ever flown for human spaceflight. Evolved from the boosters used on the space shuttle, but enhanced and lengthened. Each booster is over 17 stories tall and contains more than 600,000 pounds of solid propellant. A mixture of aluminum powder, ammonium perchlorate oxidizer, and a rubber-like binding agent called polybutadiene acrylonitrile. When ignited, each booster produces over 3.5 million pounds of thrust, bringing the total thrust at liftoff to over 8.8 million pounds. This is more than the Saturn V, the rocket that carried Apollo to the Moon, making SLS the most powerful operational rocket in history. The boosters burn for just over 2 minutes, accelerating the vehicle through the dense lower atmosphere before separating and falling into the Atlantic Ocean. Unlike the shuttle boosters, they are not recovered. The cost of retrieval and refurbishment was deemed too high for the relatively small number of planned flights. Atop the core stage sits the upper stage. For the first 3 Artemis missions, this is the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS, essentially a modified Delta IV upper stage built by United Launch Alliance. It uses a single RL-10 engine, a reliable workhorse that has powered numerous missions over decades. The ICPS provides the final push needed to send Orion toward the Moon, performing what's called the trans-lunar injection burn. After completing its job, it separates from Orion and is left behind to eventually burn up in Earth's atmosphere or drift into solar orbit. The ICPS is temporary. Starting with Artemis IV, SLS will use the Exploration Upper Stage, or EUS, a much more capable system being developed by Boeing. The EUS will be powered by 4 RL-10 engines and will have significantly more propellant capacity. This increase in capability will allow SLS to carry heavier payloads to the Moon, including large elements of gateway or cargo for lunar surface operations. The EUS represents the evolution to SLS Block 1B, a more powerful configuration that will open up new mission possibilities. Eventually, the SLS will evolve further into Block 2, the final planned configuration. Block 2 will replace the solid rocket boosters with advanced composite boosters being developed by Northrop Grumman. These will provide even more thrust while being lighter and more efficient. Combined with the EUS, Block 2 will be capable of lifting over 46 metric tons to translunar injection, making it suitable for ambitious missions like crewed expeditions to Mars. The development of SLS has not been without controversy. The program has faced significant cost overruns and schedule delays. Originally planned to be operational by 2017 at a cost of $500 million per launch, the first flight didn't occur until late 2022, and the NASA Inspector General estimated the true cost per launch at closer to $4 billion when development costs are included. Critics have argued that commercial alternatives, particularly SpaceX's Starship, could provide similar or greater capability at a fraction of the cost. Supporters counter that SLS leverages proven technology and provides assured access to deep space, independent of any single commercial provider. The rocket uses American manufacturing, supporting thousands of jobs across multiple states. Its development has also driven advances in manufacturing, including the world's largest friction stir welding tool at Michoud, capable of joining the massive aluminum structures of the core stage with unprecedented precision. The first SLS rolled out to Launch Complex 39B in March 2022, a moment years in the making. Launch Complex 39B has history. Apollo 10 launched from this pad in May 1969, beginning the dress rehearsal for the moon landing. The shuttle used it for some missions. Now it had been modified for SLS, with new systems to handle the rocket's liquid hydrogen and oxygen propellants, and to support the much larger vehicle. The initial launch attempts in late August and early September 2022 revealed problems. A hydrogen leak in a quick disconnect fitting forced a scrub. When engineers fixed that issue, they discovered another leak in a different location. Then Hurricane Ian approached Florida, forcing NASA to roll the rocket back to the vehicle assembly building for protection. Each delay was frustrating but necessary. Unlike commercial launches where a failed attempt might be written off as acceptable risk, NASA's human spaceflight program operates under intense scrutiny. Safety margins must be maintained, Problems must be understood and corrected. Finally, on November 16, 2022, at 1:47 in the morning, SLS lifted off. The solid rocket boosters ignited first, their bright flames illuminating the pre-dawn darkness. A fraction of a second later, the RS-25 engines came to life, their characteristic blue-white exhaust mixing with the booster's yellow-orange plumes. The hold-down clamps released, and 39 million pounds of rocket began rising into the night sky. The sound was overwhelming, a physical presence that could be felt miles away. The ground shook. Car alarms triggered in parking lots. Spectators who had waited hours in the cold Florida night felt the rumble in their chests. For 2 minutes, the boosters pushed the vehicle upward and eastward, accelerating through the atmosphere. Then, their propellant exhausted, they separated in twin bursts of fire and tumbled away toward the ocean below. The core stage continued burning, its 4 RS-25 engines driving SLS higher and faster. The rocket pierced through the upper atmosphere, leaving Earth's protective blanket behind. At over 500 miles per hour for every second of flight, the vehicle climbed toward orbital velocity. 8.5 minutes after liftoff, the core stage engines shut down. Their job was done. The core stage separated, leaving the ICPS and Orion to continue alone. The ICPS fired briefly to circularize the orbit, then again 90 minutes later to perform the trans-lunar injection. This 18-minute burn increased Orion's velocity by several thousand miles per hour, setting the spacecraft on its path to the Moon. When it finished, Orion separated from the spent upper stage and deployed its solar arrays, spreading their wings to gather power from the Sun. SLS had performed almost perfectly. A few minor issues were noted, nothing that threatened the mission. The rocket's structure had weathered launch loads well. The engines had operated smoothly. The complex choreography of staging and separation had gone as planned. Most importantly, Orion was on its way to the Moon, travelling faster than any spacecraft built for humans had flown in 50 years. With one flight, SLS had proven its basic capabilities. It could deliver the thrust needed to send significant mass beyond Earth's orbit. Its systems were reliable. Its design could be refined and improved for future missions. The foundation for Artemis was in place. But SLS is only half the equation. The rocket delivers payload to space, but for Artemis that payload is the most sophisticated crewed spacecraft ever built. Orion. If SLS is the strength that launches Artemis to the Moon, Orion is the protection that keeps its crew safe along the way. This spacecraft, officially the Orion Multipurpose Crew Vehicle, represents more than a decade of development by Lockheed Martin and NASA. It is designed to do something no American spacecraft has done since Apollo: carry humans beyond low Earth orbit into the hostile environment of deep space. Orion consists of 3 main components. The crew module is where astronauts live and work, a truncated cone structure, reminiscent of Apollo, but larger and far more advanced. Behind it, the European Service Module provides propulsion, power, and life support. Perched on top during launch, the launch abort system offers a critical safety measure, capable of pulling the crew module away from a failing rocket in milliseconds. The crew module is pressure vessel made of aluminum lithium alloy, strong yet relatively lightweight. Its interior offers 315 cubic feet of habitable volume, about 30% more than Apollo. This matters during missions that can last up to 3 weeks. 4 astronauts will live in this space, sleeping, eating, exercising, and working during their journey. The layout is carefully designed to maximize efficiency while maintaining livability. The seats fold down when not needed, opening up the interior. There's a compact exercise machine, important for maintaining muscle and bone density during the weightlessness of spaceflight. A small hygiene compartment, about the size of an airliner lavatory, provides privacy for bodily functions. a significant improvement over the bags and tubes used by Apollo astronauts. Storage lockers contain food, supplies, and equipment. Large windows offer views of Earth, the Moon, and the stars, maintaining the crew's connection to their surroundings. Controls and displays reflect decades of advancements since Apollo. Rather than banks of switches and electromechanical instruments, Orion uses glass cockpit displays derived from modern aircraft, like the Boeing 787. 3 large touchscreens dominate the forward console, configurable to show different information as needed. Backup physical controls exist for critical functions, but most operations can be managed through the display system. This provides flexibility and reduces the spacecraft's weight compared to traditional physical switches. Orion's computers are substantially more powerful than those of any previous crewed spacecraft. The main computer system provides processing speed about 25 times faster than the International Space Station's computers, 400 times faster than the space shuttles, and roughly 20,000 times faster than Apollo's. This computational power enables advanced automation, precise navigation, and sophisticated systems monitoring. 4 independent computers run in parallel, providing redundancy. If one fails, others can take over seamlessly. The spacecraft can fly itself for much of the mission, though the crew can take manual control at any time. An automated docking system allows Orion to rendezvous and connect with other spacecraft, including Gateway or the Human Landing System, without requiring the precise manual piloting that Apollo demanded. This capability, derived from Russian and European automated cargo vehicles, reduces crew workload and enables docking in situations where manual control might be difficult. Perhaps Orion's most critical component is its heat shield. When returning from the Moon, the spacecraft will slam into Earth's atmosphere at nearly 25,000 miles per hour, faster than any vehicle designed to carry humans. The kinetic energy must be dissipated, converted into heat through friction with the air. The heat shield absorbs and radiates this thermal energy, protecting the crew module and its occupants. The shield measures almost 17 feet in diameter and is covered with a material called avcoat, an ablative substance that chars and vaporizes in a controlled manner, carrying heat away from the spacecraft. During re-entry from the Moon, the shield's outer surface will reach temperatures approaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to turn metal into glowing liquid. Yet inside the crew module, just a few feet away, the temperature will remain comfortable in the 70s. The European Service Module, built by Airbus Defence and Space in Bremen, Germany, is Orion's powerhouse. 4 solar array wings extend from its cylindrical body, generating over 11 kilowatts of electrical power. When fully deployed, these arrays have a span of nearly 60 feet, giving Orion a distinctive cross-shaped silhouette against the black of space. Batteries store power for periods when the arrays are shadowed or when demand exceeds generation. The service module contains 8 tons of propellant for Orion's main engine and thrusters. The main engine, an Aerojet Rocketdyne unit originally developed for the Space Shuttle's orbital maneuvering system, provides 6,600 pounds of thrust. It performs major maneuvers, adjustments to trajectory, orbit changes, and the critical burn that places Orion into its return path to Earth. 32 smaller reaction control thrusters, arranged around the service module's perimeter, allow precise attitude control, keeping the spacecraft oriented correctly as it travels. Life support systems in the service module generate oxygen from water through electrolysis, manage carbon dioxide removal, control temperature and humidity, and store supplies for the crew. Tanks hold water for drinking and equipment cooling. Radiators reject waste heat into space, preventing the electronics and crew module from overheating. All these systems must operate reliably for weeks in the vacuum and temperature extremes of space, with no possibility of quick repairs. The launch abort system is Orion's insurance policy. Sitting atop the crew module during launch, connected by a lattice tower, it contains 3 solid rocket motors. If something goes catastrophically wrong with the SLS during ascent, perhaps an explosion or structural failure, sensors will detect the problem in microseconds. The launch abort system can activate automatically or be triggered by the crew, firing its abort motor to generate over 400,000 pounds of thrust. This enormous acceleration, peaking at 16 times Earth's gravity, yanks the crew module clear of the failing rocket. An attitude control motor keeps the crew module properly oriented during the abort, while a jettison motor separates the launch abort system tower once the crew module is safely away. Parachutes deploy to bring the crew module down for a water landing. The entire sequence from detection to parachute deployment takes less than 2 minutes. It's violent, uncomfortable, and potentially injurious, but far better than staying attached to an exploding rocket. If the launch proceeds normally, the launch abort system separates about 3 minutes after liftoff. Once the rocket is high enough that SLS failure becomes less likely and parachute recovery more feasible, it pulls away and falls into the Atlantic. For Orion's trip to the Moon, it's no longer needed. There's no abort option once the spacecraft leaves Earth orbit. Orion was tested before carrying astronauts. In December 2014, a test version flew on a Delta IV Heavy rocket, completing 2 orbits of Earth before re-entering at high speed to test the heat shield and parachutes. The flight, called Exploration Flight Test 1, went well, validating key systems and providing engineers with data to refine the design. The November 2022 flight on Artemis 1 provided a much more comprehensive test. For 25.5 days, Orion journeyed to the Moon and back, unmanned but heavily instrumented. It performed its outbound powered flyby burn, swooping just 81 miles above the lunar surface, then inserting into a distant retrograde orbit that took it more than 40,000 miles beyond the Moon. It tested its systems, deployed small CubeSat satellites, and captured stunning images of Earth and the Moon together. The return journey tested Orion's navigation and guidance systems. The spacecraft used the Moon's gravity to slingshot back toward Earth, then performed a skip entry, dipping into Earth's atmosphere, skipping back out like a stone on water, then re-entering for the final descent. This technique allows more precise control of the landing location while managing heat loads. Parachutes deployed in sequence, first small drogues for stability, then larger mains to slow the descent. Orion splashed into the Pacific Ocean precisely on target, proving the systems worked. Post-flight inspection revealed mostly good news. The heat shield performed well, though some ablative material had shed differently than predicted, an issue engineers began investigating. The spacecraft had endured temperature extremes, radiation exposure, and the violent jolt of re-entry. Internal systems had operated properly. Orion was ready for crew, the spacecraft being prepared for Artemis 2, the first crewed mission, incorporates refinements based on Artemis 1's flight. Displays and controls have been further optimized. Life support systems have been tuned. The crew module's interior layout has been finalized with input from astronauts. This Orion will carry 4 people around the Moon, testing everything that Artemis 3 will need for its landing mission. Orion is designed to accommodate a wide range of human sizes, from 4 feet 10 inches to 6 feet 5 inches tall, fitting 99% of the population. This inclusivity matters for the diversity goals of Artemis. The spacecraft must work for everyone, regardless of their physical dimensions. Seats and controls adjust to fit different body types. Spacesuits are being designed with similar flexibility. The spacecraft can operate autonomously for up to 6 months when docked to Gateway or another structure. This allows Gateway to serve as an uncrewed orbital outpost most of the time, with Orion serving as an emergency return vehicle if astronauts need to evacuate. When crew are aboard, Orion can support them for up to 21 days independently, enough time for a full mission to the Moon, with margin for delays or emergencies. Every system in Orion has been designed with deep space in mind. Unlike vehicles built for low Earth orbit, Orion must operate hundreds of thousands of miles from home, beyond any possibility of quick assistance. It must shield its crew from solar radiation and cosmic rays. It must manage thermal extremes as it moves between sunlight and shadow. It must provide reliable life support with no backup from Earth. It represents humanity's capability to not just visit space, but to venture into it, sustained and protected, ready for the challenges beyond our planet's embrace. The Moon hung in the sky above Launch Complex 39B, a fitting beacon for a rocket preparing to return there. On November 16th, 2022, years of development, delays and determination culminated in one brilliant moment. At 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the Space Launch System lifted off, carrying Orion toward the Moon on the Artemis 1 mission. This was an uncrewed test flight, but its importance could not be overstated. Every system, from the rocket's engines to Orion's life support, would be evaluated in the actual environment of deep space. No simulation, no ground test, no computer model could fully replicate what these vehicles would experience during a real lunar mission. Artemis 1 would prove whether the foundation of the program was sound. The mission began months earlier with the rollout from the Vehicle Assembly Building. The enormous structure, built for Saturn V, had been modified to accommodate SLS. When the doors opened and the mobile launcher emerged, carrying the fully stacked rocket and spacecraft, the sight was striking. The vehicle moved slowly along the crawlerway, the same path Apollo missions had taken decades before, toward the same launch pad Apollo 10 had used. Initial launch attempts in late August and early September encountered problems. A hydrogen leak in a quick disconnect fitting proved stubborn, appearing and disappearing as engineers worked on it. Sensors gave troubling readings about engine temperatures. Hurricane Ian forced the rocket back to the Vehicle Assembly Building for protection. Each scrub was disappointing, but NASA refused to rush. The first flight must be as successful as possible to build confidence for crewed missions. When November 16th arrived, conditions aligned. The weather cooperated. The rocket was healthy. In the final hours, teams loaded hundreds of thousands of gallons of supercooled propellants into the rocket's tanks, a delicate operation requiring precise timing and monitoring. Any leak, any anomaly, any issue could trigger another delay, but the countdown proceeded smoothly. At ignition, the world changed. The solid rocket boosters erupted in twin columns of flame and smoke. The RS-25 engines ignited fractionally later, their blue-white exhaust adding to the brilliant display. For a moment, the rocket hung on its pad, restrained by massive hold-down bolts, while computers verified that all engines were producing proper thrust. Then the bolts exploded, releasing their grip, and 39 million pounds of rocket began to rise. The light was visible for dozens of miles, turning the night into brief day. The sound arrived seconds later, a rolling thunder that rattled windows and stirred sleeping residents. For spectators gathered around Kennedy Space Center and along nearby beaches, the sight was emotional. Many had waited years for this moment. Some had worked on Artemis, others on Apollo decades before. This was America returning to the Moon, a capability restored after half a century. The ascent was nominal. The boosters burned for just over 2 minutes, their thrust accelerating the vehicle through the dense lower atmosphere. When their propellant was exhausted, Explosive bolts severed their connection to the core stage, and they tumbled away, falling toward the Atlantic Ocean far below. The core stage continued burning, its 4 RS-25 engines pushing SLS higher and faster with each passing second. The rocket accelerated past the speed of sound, through maximum aerodynamic pressure, beyond the reaches of Earth's atmosphere, into the black of space. 8 minutes and 32 seconds after liftoff, the core stage engines shut down. The massive cylinder had completed its purpose, burning through over 700,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen to deliver Orion to the edge of space. Small explosive charges fired, separating the core stage, which would eventually re-enter and break apart over the Pacific Ocean, its job complete. The interim cryogenic propulsion stage took over, firing briefly to place Orion into a stable parking orbit around Earth. This gave ground controllers time to verify all systems before committing to the lunar trajectory. For 90 minutes, Orion circled the planet, its systems powering up and checking out. Inside the crew module, 3 mannequins fitted with thousands of sensors waited to collect data on radiation exposure and acceleration forces that future astronauts would experience. Then came the critical moment, trans-lunar injection. The ICPS engine ignited for an 18-minute burn, increasing Orion's velocity by thousands of miles per hour. This delta V, the change in velocity, was enough to break free from Earth's gravitational embrace and send the spacecraft arcing toward the Moon. It was the longest engine firing of the flight, and Orion climbed steadily away from Earth as it progressed. When the burn completed, Orion separated from the spent upper stage. Small thrusters fired, pushing the spacecraft clear. Solar arrays unfurled from the European service module, 4 wings spreading wide to capture sunlight and convert it to electricity. The ICPS, its mission accomplished, drifted away on a trajectory that would eventually take it into orbit around the Sun. Before it departed, it deployed 10 small CubeSat satellites, shoebox-sized spacecraft built by various organizations to test technologies and conduct experiments during the transit to lunar space. Orion was now alone, coasting through the void between Earth and Moon. The spacecraft settled into a routine that would characterize the next several days. Its computers maintained proper orientation, keeping the solar arrays pointed toward the Sun and managing the thermal environment. Communication antennas stayed pointed toward Earth, sending back telemetry data and high-definition images. Inside, the 3 mannequins, nicknamed Commander Munikin Campos, Helga, and Zohar, silently collected data on radiation and vibration. Commander Munikin Campos sat in the commander's seat, wearing an Orion crew survival system suit similar to what astronauts would wear during launch and re-entry. Sensors throughout the suit measured acceleration forces and vibrations at critical body points. Helga and Zohar, torso-only mannequins made of materials simulating human tissue, wore special vests to measure radiation exposure. Zohar's vest contained radiation shielding, Helga's did not. The comparison would help engineers understand how effective the shielding was in protecting against the high-energy particles that fill deep space. The first major event came on day 5, the outbound powered flyby. As Orion approached the Moon, it wasn't trying to enter orbit yet. Instead, it would skim low over the lunar surface, using the Moon's gravity to bend its trajectory while the European service module's main engine provided additional thrust. This maneuver, lasting about 2.5 minutes, shaped Orion's path for insertion into the distant retrograde orbit planned for the mission. The spacecraft passed just 81 miles above the lunar surface, closer to the Moon than any spacecraft designed for humans had flown since Apollo 17 in 1972. Cameras captured stunning views of the cratered terrain passing below, the ancient surface untouched by atmosphere or weather, marked only by countless impacts, over billions of years. Earth hung in the black sky beyond, a blue and white marble, impossibly distant yet still home. After the flyby, Orion continued outward, moving away from the moon along a looping trajectory. Over the next several days, it climbed to its maximum distance, 270,000 miles from Earth, farther than any spacecraft built for humans had ever travelled. At this distance, Earth and Moon could fit together in a single camera frame, a pale blue dot and its grey companion suspended in the cosmic dark. On day 10, Orion performed the distant retrograde orbit insertion burn, firing its engine to enter a stable orbit that carried it 40,000 miles beyond the Moon. This orbit is called retrograde because Orion travelled in the opposite direction to the Moon's orbit around Earth. It's distant because, well, it's very far from the lunar surface. The orbit is exceptionally stable, requiring minimal propellant to maintain, which makes it ideal for Gateway's eventual location. Orion spent nearly a week in this orbit, looping around the far side of the Moon every few days. Engineers tested various systems, communication at different attitudes, power generation from the solar arrays, thermal management as the spacecraft moved through sunlight and shadow, navigation accuracy using star trackers, and ground tracking. Everything worked remarkably well. Minor glitches appeared and were resolved. The spacecraft proved it could function in the deep space environment. On day 16, Orion departed lunar orbit with a distant retrograde orbit departure burn. This maneuver sent the spacecraft on its return trajectory toward Earth, though the journey would take another week. The path was carefully designed to bring Orion to Earth at the precise angle needed for re-entry, not too steep, which would generate excessive heating, and not too shallow, which would cause the spacecraft to skip off the atmosphere back into space. As Orion fell back toward Earth, it performed a second lunar flyby, this time farther out, using the Moon's gravity one final time to refine its approach. The spacecraft accelerated, pulled by Earth's gravity, building the tremendous velocity it would carry into the atmosphere. By the final day, it was travelling at nearly 25,000 miles per hour, faster than a speeding bullet by a factor of 30. December 11th, 2022 was Splashdown Day. Orion approached Earth from the direction of the Moon, threading through a narrow corridor in space that would deliver it to the recovery zone in the Pacific Ocean west of Baja California. The entry interface, the point where Orion reached the outer wisps of atmosphere, came at 400,000 feet altitude. The spacecraft was committed now, no turning back, riding its heat shield through the building forces. Orion performed a skip entry, intentionally bouncing off the atmosphere before settling into its final descent. As it hit the atmosphere the first time, the heat shield began to glow. Plasma, ionized gas superheated by friction, surrounded the spacecraft in a sheath of fire. Communications went dead, blocked by the plasma. This was expected, a blackout period of several minutes when ground controllers could only wait. The skip occurred at about 200,000 feet. Orion climbed briefly, shedding some of its energy in that first dip, then re-entered for the final descent. The heat shield reached its peak temperature, approaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Through the windows, if anyone had been aboard, the view would have been otherworldly. The glow of plasma, the pressure of deceleration building, the spacecraft shuddering as it ploughed through the air. At about 30,000 feet, having slowed from orbital velocity to a few hundred miles per hour, Orion deployed its drogue parachutes. 2 small chutes burst from the forward bay, stabilizing the spacecraft and slowing it further. Then, at 5,000 feet, the 3 main parachutes deployed in sequence, each one blossoming into an orange and white canopy over 100 feet in diameter. Suspended beneath them, Orion drifted gently downward, a spacecraft that had travelled nearly 1.5 million miles, coming home at the pace of a leisurely walk. At 11:40 a.m. Pacific time, Orion splashed into the Pacific Ocean. Recovery teams aboard Navy ships were waiting nearby. They approached the floating spacecraft, secured it, and began the process of lifting it onto the ship's deck. Inside, the mannequins had completed their mission, their sensors full of data about what humans would experience on this journey. Post-flight inspection revealed a spacecraft that had performed extraordinarily well. The structure showed no concerning damage. Systems had operated properly throughout the mission. The European service module's solar arrays and propulsion had worked flawlessly. The heat shield had protected the crew module through the violence of re-entry, though engineers noted that some ablative material had come off in larger pieces than expected in a few areas. This became a subject of detailed investigation. Understanding exactly how the heat shield behaves during lunar return velocities is critical for crew safety. The mannequin's radiation sensors provided valuable data. Helga, without the protective vest, received a radiation dose equivalent to about 2.5 months aboard the International Space Station, compressed into 25 days. Zohar, with the vest, experienced measurably lower exposure in the protected areas. This confirmed that the shielding concept worked, though it also underscored the radiation challenge of deep space travel. Future missions would need to manage crew exposure carefully. Overall, Artemis 1 was declared a success. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson called it an historic day for human exploration, noting that the mission had accomplished all its primary objectives. Engineers had data to refine systems for Artemis 2. The rocket and spacecraft had proven themselves capable. Most importantly, confidence had been built. The hardware could do the job. For many watching, Artemis 1 represented more than a test flight. It was proof that the long journey back to the moon was real, that after decades of false starts and cancelled programs, humanity was actually returning to Earth's companion. The mission showed that the technologies existed, that they worked, and that humans would soon follow the path Orion had blazed through the void. The mannequins did their job. Now it would be time for actual astronauts to ride Orion around the moon, the first humans to venture beyond low Earth orbit in over 50 years. Artemis 2 represents a crucial step between the uncrewed test of Artemis 1 and the landing mission of Artemis 3. It will validate all the systems that support human life in deep space, test operational procedures, and give the crew experience with flying Orion before committing to the more complex lunar landing mission. 4 astronauts will fly Artemis 2, selected from the highly trained ranks of NASA's astronaut corps. Commander Reed Wiseman brings extensive spaceflight experience, having previously flown on the Space Shuttle and spent 165 days aboard the International Space Station. Pilot Victor Glover made history as part of the first operational SpaceX Crew Dragon mission and spent nearly 6 months on the space station. Mission Specialist 1 Christina Koch holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman at 328 days, and she conducted 6 spacewalks during her time in orbit. Mission Specialist 2 Jeremy Hansen represents the Canadian Space Agency, bringing an international element to the crew and honouring Canada's contributions to Artemis through Gateway and other systems. The crew brings diversity that Apollo never had. Victor Glover will be the first black astronaut to travel to the moon. Christina Koch will be the first woman. They represent a more inclusive vision of space exploration, one where humanity means all of humanity, not just a narrow slice. Their presence sends a message about who belongs in space. Everyone. Training for Artemis 2 has been extensive. The crew has spent hundreds of hours in simulators, practicing normal operations and emergency procedures. They've tested the Orion crew survival system suits that they'll wear during launch and re-entry. They've practiced water survival in case the spacecraft lands off target and they need to egress before recovery teams arrive. They've worked with flight controllers, building the team cohesion and communication patterns that will be essential during the mission. The flight profile for Artemis 2 will last approximately 10 days. Like Artemis 1, it will begin with launch from Kennedy Space Center, with SLS lifting the crew away from Earth. The ascent will subject them to forces up to 4 times Earth's gravity as the rocket accelerates through the atmosphere, though this is less than what shuttle astronauts experienced. The launch abort system will remain attached for the first few minutes, ready to pull the crew module clear if something goes wrong with the rocket. After reaching orbit and separating from the ICPS, Orion will spend time in Earth orbit checking out systems before committing to trans-lunar injection. This gives the crew and ground teams time to verify everything is working correctly. If problems arise, the mission could be shortened or even aborted while still in Earth orbit. Once the trans-lunar injection burn occurs, though, the crew is committed to the full mission profile. There's no quick return from that trajectory. The journey to the moon will take several days, time spent adapting to weightlessness, conducting system checks, and maintaining the spacecraft. The crew will be the first humans to experience zero gravity beyond Earth orbit since Apollo. While the sensation is the same whether you're 200 miles up or 200,000 miles up, the psychological aspect differs. Looking back and seeing Earth as a distant sphere rather than a vast curved surface below creates a profound shift in perspective. The Apollo astronauts called it the overview effect, a cognitive shift in awareness caused by viewing Earth from a distance. Artemis 2 will not enter lunar orbit. Instead, it will perform a free return trajectory, a figure-8 path that loops around the moon and uses lunar gravity to slingshot back toward Earth. This trajectory is inherently safer than entering orbit, because if Orion's engines fail, the spacecraft will still return to Earth without requiring additional burns. Apollo 8, the first crewed mission to the moon in December 1968, used a similar profile. The closest approach to the moon will bring the crew within about 75 miles of the surface, close enough to see details of the terrain, far enough to avoid any navigation errors that might result in an unintended impact. They'll spend several hours in the moon's vicinity, circling around the far side where communication with Earth is blocked, emerging again on the Earth-facing side. The view will be extraordinary. The stark grey terrain beneath them, Earth rising above the horizon, the sun casting harsh shadows in a sky utterly black. During the lunar portion of the mission, the crew will test Orion's systems under real-world conditions. They'll practice manual control of the spacecraft, verify that the star trackers can navigate accurately near the moon, and test communication systems at the extreme range. They'll also conduct what's called a proximity operations demonstration, using Orion's sensors and cameras to track a target, rehearsing the techniques that will be needed when Artemis 3 docks with a human landing system. The return journey will follow the same high-speed re-entry profile as Artemis 1. The crew will experience the heat, vibration, and deceleration of coming home from the moon, validating that humans can tolerate it safely. Peak deceleration will reach about 4 times Earth's gravity, sustained for several minutes. It's uncomfortable, but manageable, far less violent than what astronauts experienced in early spacecraft. Splashdown will occur in the Pacific Ocean, with Navy recovery ships waiting nearby. Unlike Apollo, which used helicopters to lift the crew from the capsule while it was still in the water, Artemis 2 will be recovered by ship. The spacecraft will be secured and lifted aboard, then the crew will egress onto the deck. This method is less dramatic than helicopter pickup, but is considered safer and allows for better medical monitoring of the crew immediately after landing. The mission timeline has shifted multiple times. Originally scheduled for late 2024, Artemis II was delayed to September 2025, then to April 2026. As of late 2025, the official target is April 2027, though this depends on resolution of several technical issues identified during Artemis I and subsequent testing. The heat shield issue discovered after Artemis I required extensive investigation. Engineers needed to understand why the ablative material had shed differently than predicted and ensure it would behave safely with crew aboard. Additional testing, analysis, and potentially modifications to the heat shield or re-entry trajectory took time. NASA has emphasized that they will not fly crew until this issue is fully understood and resolved. The Orion life support systems also require careful validation. While they operated well in the uncrewed test, supporting human metabolic processes introduces additional complexity. The system must remove carbon dioxide exhaled by the crew, manage humidity from perspiration and breathing, maintain proper oxygen levels, and control temperature. Any failure could threaten the crew, so multiple redundant systems exist, and all must be proven reliable. The mission patch for Artemis II reflects the historic nature of the flight. It depicts Orion against the backdrop of the Moon, with Earth visible beyond. 4 stars represent the crew members. The design is clean, elegant, a symbol of purpose and capability. For the crew, Artemis II represents the opportunity of a lifetime. Only 24 humans have ever travelled to the Moon, all during a brief period from 1968 to 1972. Wiseman, Glover, Koch and Hansen will become numbers 25 through 28, the first additions to that exclusive group in over half a century. Their mission paves the way for others to follow, testing the systems and procedures that will enable sustainable lunar exploration. When Artemis II flies, it will mark humanity's return to deep space as a crewed endeavour. The International Space Station has been continuously occupied for over 2 decades, an incredible achievement, but one that keeps astronauts close to Earth. Artemis II reaches outward again, reclaiming capabilities lost when Apollo ended. It demonstrates that the Moon is not impossibly distant, not a goal for some far future generation, but a destination humans can reach and will soon visit regularly. The mission also builds momentum for Artemis III, the landing that will follow. By proving Orion and SLS with crew aboard, Artemis II removes much of the uncertainty from the more complex landing mission. If problems arise, they can be discovered and fixed before astronauts depend on the systems for a lunar surface expedition. The crew of Artemis II will return with experience and insights that will help refine plans for Artemis III and beyond. The goal of Artemis, the reason for all the development and expense and effort, comes into focus with Artemis III. This mission will land astronauts on the Moon for the first time since December 1972, ending a hiatus of over 50 years. It will put the first woman and first person of colour on the lunar surface. It will begin the sustained human presence on the Moon that Artemis promises. Artemis III is significantly more complex than its predecessors. Where Artemis II flies a relatively simple loop around the Moon, Artemis III requires multiple spacecraft, precise choreography in lunar orbit, and a descent to the surface using systems still under development. The mission profile involves SLS and Orion, the human landing system based on SpaceX's Starship, and potentially Gateway, depending on the final mission architecture. The crew will likely be 4 astronauts, though the exact composition hasn't been announced. 2 will descend to the surface, while 2 remain in Orion, maintaining the spacecraft and serving as backup if rescue is needed. The selection of who walks on the Moon will consider experience, training, mission roles, and the commitment to diversity that shapes Artemis. The landing site will be somewhere in the lunar South Polar region, a dramatic departure from Apollo. All 6 Apollo landings occurred relatively near the Moon's equator, in areas that were relatively flat and well lit. The South Pole offers something Apollo sites didn't: water ice in permanently shadowed craters, where sunlight has never reached for billions of years. This ice could be a game changer for sustainable exploration, providing water for drinking, oxygen for breathing, and hydrogen and oxygen for rocket propellant. However, landing near the South Pole presents challenges. The sun hangs low on the horizon, creating long shadows and extreme contrasts between bright and dark areas. Some regions receive almost constant sunlight, valuable for solar power, while nearby craters sit in eternal darkness, cold traps holding ancient ice. Navigation and landing in this environment is more difficult than the relatively smooth terrain Apollo targeted. Cameras must handle the extreme lighting. Landing systems must cope with slopes and rough ground. Several candidate landing sites have been identified near the South Pole, each offering a balance of scientific interest, resource potential, and operational feasibility. Shackleton Crater, a large impact crater directly at the lunar South Pole, is one possibility. Ridges and elevated areas nearby receive nearly continuous sunlight and have cold traps in their vicinity. Other sites near craters like Hayworth, Shoemaker, and Nobile offer similar characteristics. The mission begins similarly to Artemis II, with SLS launching Orion and its crew from Kennedy Space Center. The trans-lunar injection burn sends them toward the Moon, following a trajectory refined by the experience of previous missions. This time, though, Orion will enter lunar orbit rather than performing a free return trajectory. The spacecraft will use its engine to slow down and be captured by the Moon's gravity, settling into an orbit that brings it close to the planned landing site. The human landing system will already be waiting in lunar orbit, having been launched separately and sent to the Moon ahead of the crew. This pre-positioning is necessary because Starship is far too large to launch on SLS. Instead, SpaceX will use its Super Heavy booster to launch Starship into Earth orbit. Then multiple additional Starship tanker launches will refuel it in orbit, providing enough propellant to reach the Moon. Orion will rendezvous and dock with Starship in lunar orbit. 2 crew members will transfer through the docking tunnel into Starship, saying farewell to their crewmates, who will wait in Orion. The undocking will leave Orion in orbit with 2 astronauts, while Starship, now carrying 2 astronauts, prepares to descend. Starship's lunar variant has been modified significantly from the version designed to reach Mars. It lacks the heat shield and aerodynamic surfaces needed for atmospheric entry, since the Moon has no atmosphere. Instead, landing legs extend from the lower section, designed to touch down on the lunar surface and support the vehicle's weight in the Moon's 1/6 gravity. The crew cabin is located high on the vehicle, requiring an elevator system to transport astronauts from the cabin to the surface, a distance of over 30 feet. The descent will be automated but monitored by the crew, who can take manual control if needed. Starship will fire its engines to slow down from orbital velocity, descending gradually toward the landing site. Unlike Apollo's lunar module, which burned for about 12 minutes during descent, Starship's more efficient engines and larger propellant capacity allow a more leisurely, controlled descent. The engines will throttle to manage the vehicle's weight and the Moon's gravity, bringing Starship to a hover just above the surface before settling gently onto its landing legs. Touchdown will mark the moment, humans on the Moon again. The crew will take time to verify all systems, check for any anomalies from the landing, and prepare for the surface activities that are the mission's ultimate purpose. Then, after hours of preparation, the hatch will open. An astronaut will step onto the elevator platform, descend to the surface, and step off onto the Moon. The Artemis spacesuit, developed by Axiom Space under contract to NASA, provides more mobility than the Apollo suits. Modern materials and design allow greater flexibility at the joints, particularly at the waist, hips and shoulders. This enables astronauts to kneel, bend, reach, and move in ways that were difficult or impossible in the bulky Apollo suits. The suit's life support systems are improved as well, capable of sustaining astronauts for up to 8 hours outside. The surface stay for Artemis 3 will last about a week, far longer than Apollo missions, which ranged from just under 22 hours to about 75 hours on the surface. This extended time allows for multiple excursions outside, called extravehicular activities, or EVAs. Each EVA will last 6 to 8 hours, with the crew venturing out from Starship to explore the surrounding area, collect samples, deploy scientific instruments, and test equipment. The lunar South Pole environment will feel different from Apollo landing sites. The sun will appear to move slowly across the horizon rather than climbing high into the sky. Shadows will be long and stark. Temperature variations will be extreme, with areas in sunlight approaching boiling temperatures, while shadowed regions plunge to hundreds of degrees below zero. The astronauts' suits will need to manage these thermal extremes carefully. One priority will be to investigate the water ice that makes the South Pole so attractive. This might involve venturing to the edge of a permanently shadowed region, using lights and instruments to probe into the darkness. Sampling the regolith, the loose rocky material covering the surface, will reveal how much ice is present and how accessible it is. This data will be crucial for planning future missions that might extract and use this water. The crew will also set up scientific instruments. Modern technology allows smaller, more capable instruments than what Apollo deployed. Seismometers will listen for moonquakes, helping scientists understand the moon's interior structure. Instruments will measure the extremely tenuous lunar exosphere, the thin shell of atoms that barely qualifies as an atmosphere. Others will study solar wind particles and cosmic radiation, phenomena that reach the lunar surface unimpeded by any protective magnetic field or atmosphere. The return journey to orbit will reverse the landing sequence. Starship will lift off using its engines, climbing back into orbit to rendezvous with Orion. The two spacecraft will dock. The surface crew will transfer back to Orion, and Starship will be left behind in lunar orbit, its mission complete. Orion will fire its engine to leave lunar orbit and begin the journey home, following the same high-speed return that Artemis 1 and 2 demonstrated. Splashdown will return the crew to Earth, carrying with them samples of lunar rock and soil, data from their exploration, and the experience of walking on another world. The mission will have achieved its primary goal, returning humans to the moon. But more than that, it will have demonstrated that lunar surface operations are possible with modern technology, that the south polar regions are accessible, and that water ice can be investigated in person. The timeline for Artemis 3 has been challenging to pin down. Early plans called for a 2025 landing, matching the political goal set in 2019. That date slipped to 2026, then 2027. Current NASA estimates target mid to late 2027, though this depends on multiple factors: completion and testing of Starship as a lunar lander, resolution of Orion heat shield issues, launch availability, and overall mission readiness. SpaceX's development of Starship has progressed rapidly, but not without setbacks. Several test flights have ended in dramatic explosions as the company pushes the vehicle through increasingly difficult test profiles. This iterative development approach, building and testing rapidly to discover problems, differs from NASA's traditional methodical engineering. It's faster and cheaper, but accepts more failures along the way. For Starship to serve as a human landing system, it must demonstrate consistent reliability, something that takes time and many test flights to achieve. Starship must also prove its orbital refueling capability. Reaching the Moon requires far more propellant than fits in a single Starship. The concept calls for launching multiple tanker starships, carrying nothing but propellant, which will dock with the lunar Starship and transfer fuel. This has never been attempted at the scale required. Demonstrating that it works reliably is essential before NASA will commit crew to depending on it. There's also the matter of Gateway. Early plans called for Artemis 3 to use Gateway as a staging point, with Orion docking to Gateway and the crew transferring to Starship from there. However, delays in Gateway development led NASA to consider alternative mission profiles, where Orion docks directly with Starship without using Gateway. This simplifies Artemis 3, but means Gateway won't be available for the first landing mission. Despite uncertainties in timing, the components are coming together. Orion has flown and proven itself. SLS has launched successfully. Starship is flying increasingly sophisticated test missions, each one bringing the vehicle closer to operational capability. The spacesuits are being tested. Landing site reconnaissance continues through orbital missions. The path to landing on the Moon is visible, even if the exact date remains somewhat flexible. When Artemis 3 succeeds, it will join Apollo 11 as one of the defining moments in space exploration history. The images of astronauts working near the lunar South Pole, perhaps with Earth visible in the black sky above, will inspire new generations. The mission will prove that the Moon is not a destination we visited once in the distant past, but a place we can return to and eventually inhabit. It represents the first step in making humanity a truly spacefaring species. While Artemis missions focus on landing astronauts on the Moon, another crucial element takes shape in lunar orbit: Gateway. This small space station, assembled from modules contributed by multiple nations, will serve as a staging point for surface missions, a platform for scientific research, and a proving ground for technologies needed for Mars exploration. Gateway differs fundamentally from the International Space Station. The ISS orbits Earth at about 250 miles altitude, well within Earth's protective magnetic field and atmosphere. Astronauts aboard receive some shielding from harmful space radiation. Resupply missions arrive regularly, every few months, bringing fresh food, spare parts and experiments. The station is continuously occupied, with crew rotating every 6 months. Gateway will orbit the Moon in a near rectilinear halo orbit, or NRHO, a peculiar path that takes advantage of gravitational dynamics between Earth and Moon. This orbit is highly elliptical, bringing Gateway within about 1,500 miles of the lunar South Pole at its closest point, then swinging out to about 43,000 miles at its farthest. One orbit takes about 7 days. The NRHO is gravitationally stable, requiring minimal propellant to maintain, and provides excellent views of both the lunar South Pole and Earth. However, Gateway will be far from Earth, beyond the protection of our planet's magnetic field, exposed to the full intensity of space radiation. Communication delays will be about 3 seconds round trip, not enough to make conversation impossible, but enough to create noticeable lag. Resupply missions will be expensive and infrequent, requiring careful planning of resources. Most of the time, Gateway will be uncrewed, operating autonomously until an Artemis mission arrives. Gateway is being assembled from several modules, each with specific functions. The power and propulsion element, or PPE, provides the station's electrical power through large solar arrays and offers propulsion for maintaining the orbit and manoeuvring the station as needed. Built by Maxar Technologies, the PPE uses electric propulsion, specifically Hall effect thrusters, which provide thrust efficiently over long periods by accelerating ionized xenon propellant. The Habitation and Logistics Outpost, or HALO, is Gateway's primary living space. Built by Northrop Grumman, Halo is derived from Cygnus cargo spacecraft that currently resupply the ISS. It provides sleeping quarters for 4 astronauts, a small galley for food preparation, a hygiene compartment, and workspace. The module also includes docking ports for visiting spacecraft like Orion and the Human Landing System. At about 20 feet long and 10 feet in diameter, Halo is compact but functional, designed for crews staying weeks rather than months. The European Space Agency is contributing the International Habitation Module, or IHAB, which will provide additional living space, more capable life support systems, and enhanced communication capabilities. Built by Thales Alenia Space in Italy, IHAB expands Gateway's capacity, making longer duration missions more comfortable and supporting more crew members. It includes its own sleeping quarters, a second galley, and more storage for supplies and equipment. Canada is providing the External Robotics and Intelligence System, or Canadarm3. This is a highly advanced robotic arm system, evolved from the Canadarms used on the Space Shuttle and ISS. Canadarm3 consists of 2 arms that can work together or independently, providing dexterity for manipulating payloads, capturing visiting spacecraft, performing maintenance, and assisting with assembly tasks. The system is designed to operate autonomously when no crew is present, able to respond to commands from Earth to handle routine operations. Japan's space agency, JAXA, is contributing logistics modules for delivering cargo and potentially a habitat module. These contributions strengthen the international nature of Gateway and demonstrate the collaborative spirit of Artemis. Other nations may add additional modules as the station grows. The assembly sequence begins with launch of PPE and Halo together on a Falcon Heavy rocket. They will be sent to lunar orbit already connected, forming the initial Gateway configuration. Once they arrive and verify all systems are operational, Gateway will be ready for its first crew visit. Subsequent modules will be launched separately and added to the station over time, gradually expanding its capabilities. Gateway serves multiple purposes. For Artemis surface missions, it acts as a rendezvous point where Orion can dock and astronauts can transfer to the Human Landing System without requiring a direct Orion-to-lander docking in lunar orbit. This provides flexibility in mission planning and creates a safety net. If problems arise during surface operations, astronauts can reach Gateway and wait in relative safety for rescue options to be developed. The station also enables scientific research impossible elsewhere. Its location beyond Earth's magnetic field exposes it to the space radiation environment that astronauts will experience during Mars missions. Studying how systems and humans fare in this environment helps prepare for deep space exploration. The view of the lunar South Pole allows detailed observation of potential landing sites and scientific features. Instruments mounted on Gateway can study the Moon, observe Earth, and monitor the space environment between the two worlds. Gateway will also serve as a testbed for life support technologies needed for Mars. The station must recycle air and water efficiently, since resupply is expensive and infrequent. Systems aboard Gateway will push recycling to higher efficiency than the ISS achieves, approaching the levels needed for a multi-year Mars mission where resupply is impossible. Testing these technologies near the Moon, where help is only days away if something goes wrong, is safer than discovering problems on the way to Mars. The station's autonomous operations capability is crucial. Unlike the ISS, which has constant human oversight, Gateway must operate safely for months without crew aboard. It must maintain its orbit, manage power generation and thermal control, monitor systems for failures, and execute commands from ground controllers despite the communication delay. This autonomous capability will be essential for any future mission where spacecraft operate far from Earth. Power for Gateway comes entirely from solar arrays on the PPE. These arrays generate about 60 kilowatts of electrical power when the station is fully assembled and illuminated, far more than the modules need for basic operations. The excess power can charge batteries for when Gateway moves into shadow during its orbit, or provide power for visiting spacecraft and experiments. The interior of Gateway will feel different from the ISS. Where the space station is a complex of modules creating a substantial volume for its 6 or 7 crew members, Gateway is smaller, designed for up to 4 people for shorter stays. The modules are arranged linearly rather than in the sprawling configuration of ISS, making navigation simpler but offering less personal space. Astronauts will need to be comfortable with close quarters and limited privacy. One notable feature of Gateway is its logistics strategy. Rather than requiring regular cargo missions, Gateway will rely on Orion bringing supplies during crew visits and potentially on dedicated logistics modules that can be left docked for extended periods. This approach reduces the number of expensive launches needed to support the station while ensuring necessary supplies are available. The first crewed mission to Gateway, currently planned as part of Artemis 4, will deliver astronauts to the station to verify its systems, practice operations, and prepare it for future lunar surface missions. The crew will spend time aboard, testing how well systems work in the harsh radiation environment beyond Earth's magnetosphere. They'll verify that life support, power, thermal control, and communication systems all function as designed. They'll practice transferring between Orion and Gateway, docking procedures, and emergency protocols. This shakedown period is essential before Gateway becomes an operational part of the lunar exploration infrastructure. Subsequent missions will continue expanding Gateway's capabilities. Additional modules will be added, increasing habitable volume and functionality. Scientific instruments will be installed on external mounting points, creating an orbital laboratory for studying the Moon and deep space. The station will gradually transform from a basic outpost into a sophisticated facility supporting sustained lunar exploration. Critics of Gateway have questioned whether it's necessary. Some argue that going directly from lunar orbit to the surface using Orion and a lander would be simpler and cheaper than building and maintaining a station. Others point out that Gateway doesn't orbit the Moon in a way that makes reaching the entire lunar surface equally easy. Its orbit is optimized for the South Polar region. There are also concerns about cost. Developing, launching, and operating Gateway diverts funds from other Artemis elements, like surface habitats or additional landers. Supporters counter that Gateway provides capabilities impossible without it. The station offers a place for astronauts to prepare for surface missions, sort equipment, and adapt to the deep space environment before descending to the surface. It creates redundancy. If a lander has problems, astronauts have somewhere safe to wait while solutions are developed. Gateway also serves as a communications relay, potentially filling in coverage gaps when the Moon blocks direct line of sight between surface astronauts and Earth. Most importantly, it advances technologies and operations needed for Mars, where orbital stations might prove essential for managing surface missions on the Red Planet. The station's location in the NRHO also provides strategic advantages. From this orbit, Gateway can observe much of the lunar far side, the hemisphere permanently facing away from Earth. Future missions might use Gateway as a base for exploring far-side locations, either with robotic precursor missions or eventually human expeditions. The orbit also keeps Gateway out of the lunar shadow most of the time, ensuring nearly continuous solar power without the repeated eclipses that low lunar orbit would create. Gateway represents a middle ground between staying in low Earth orbit and sending humans to Mars. It pushes human presence beyond Earth's immediate vicinity while remaining close enough that rescue or resupply is possible within days rather than months. This intermediate step helps space agencies and companies learn the operational challenges of deep space before committing to much longer and more dangerous missions. The station will also demonstrate international cooperation on an unprecedented scale. While the ISS showed that nations could work together in space, it orbits in a relatively benign environment with easy access. Gateway operates in a harsh, distant environment where cooperation isn't just beneficial, but necessary. The participating nations share costs, expertise, and risks, building trust and establishing frameworks for future collaboration on even more ambitious ventures. Looking further ahead, Gateway might serve as more than just a lunar outpost. Some concepts envision using the station as a staging point for missions to Mars, with spacecraft assembling near the Moon before beginning the months-long journey to the Red Planet. Others imagine Gateway as the first of several such stations, creating infrastructure throughout cislunar space. These visions are speculative, but reflect the potential Gateway represents. Not just a destination, but a stepping stone to much broader human presence in space. The timeline for Gateway assembly has slipped multiple times, paralleling delays in other Artemis elements. The combined PPE and Halo launch was originally targeted for late 2024, then 2025, and as of late 2025 is scheduled for no earlier than 2026. These delays cascade through the program. If Gateway isn't ready, missions that depend on it must adjust their plans or find alternative approaches. Despite uncertainties in schedule, Gateway development continues. Hardware is being built. Tests verify systems work. Flight procedures are being written. The station may not arrive as quickly as initially hoped, but it is coming. Piece by piece, module by module, building a human outpost around the Moon that earlier generations could only imagine. Getting humans from lunar orbit to the surface and back safely requires a vehicle unlike any that has flown before. The Apollo lunar module remains the only spacecraft ever to land humans on another world. A spindly, aluminum-skinned craft optimized for the Moon's 1/6 gravity and airless environment. Now, over 50 years later, a new generation of lunar landers is being developed, and the designs look nothing like Apollo. For Artemis 3, the first landing mission, NASA selected SpaceX's Starship to serve as the Human Landing System, or HLS. This decision, announced in April 2021, surprised many observers. Starship is enormous compared to the Apollo lunar module, standing over 160 feet tall when configured for lunar missions, roughly the height of a 15-story building. It's designed to carry far more cargo and crew than Apollo ever could, and it's being developed primarily for Mars missions, with the lunar variant being a specialized derivative. The selection process was contentious. NASA originally intended to choose 2 companies to develop landing systems, ensuring redundancy and competition. 3 teams submitted proposals: SpaceX with Starship, Blue Origin leading a national team that included Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper, and Dynetics with a more conventional, smaller lander design. Each had strengths. Blue Origin's bid emphasized experience and safety. Dynetics offered lower complexity. SpaceX proposed the most capability at the lowest cost. Budget constraints forced NASA to select only one company. SpaceX's bid came in significantly lower than the others, reportedly around $3 billion compared to $6 billion or more for the alternatives. Combined with SpaceX's track record of delivering functional spacecraft and their willingness to invest company funds alongside NASA's, the choice made economic sense. But it was risky. Starship was less developed than the other proposals and required multiple unproven technologies to work. Blue Origin protested the decision, arguing that NASA hadn't followed proper procurement procedures and that choosing only one lander created unacceptable risk. The protest delayed work on Starship HLS for several months, while the Government Accountability Office reviewed the selection. In July 2021, the GAO denied the protest, finding that NASA had acted properly within the constraints of its budget. SpaceX resumed work, but the delays pushed the schedule back. Recognizing the value of redundancy, NASA later awarded Blue Origin a contract in May 2023 to develop a second lunar lander for Artemis 5 and beyond. This contract, worth about $3.5 billion, funds development of Blue Moon, a more traditional lander design that can carry up to 4 astronauts to the surface. Having 2 landers provides backup capability and encourages competition that could drive innovation and reduce costs. Starship HLS represents a fundamentally different approach to lunar landing than Apollo. The Apollo lunar module was small and light, optimized to minimize the mass that the Saturn V had to lift to the Moon. It had just enough propellant to descend from orbit, land, then lift the ascent stage back to orbit for rendezvous with the command module. Everything was single-use, discarded after one mission. This efficiency came at the cost of cargo capacity. Apollo astronauts brought very little equipment and could stay on the surface only a few days. Starship HLS is designed for sustainability. It's far larger, allowing it to carry significant cargo along with crew. The extra space enables longer surface stays, more equipment, and better living conditions. Unlike Apollo, which had 2 crew members hunched inside a cabin the size of a closet, Starship provides room to move, separate spaces for different functions, and storage for extended missions. The vehicle's size creates challenges, though. Starship HLS is too large to launch on SLS, so it must reach the Moon using SpaceX's own Super Heavy booster. Even then, a single launch doesn't provide enough propellant to reach the Moon. The mission profile requires launching Starship into Earth orbit, mostly empty, then sending additional tanker Starships to rendezvous and transfer propellant. Current plans call for somewhere between 8 and 14 refueling flights to provide the roughly 1,200 metric tons of liquid oxygen and liquid methane propellant needed for the lunar mission. This orbital refueling is unprecedented at the required scale. Transferring cryogenic propellants between spacecraft in orbit involves challenges. Maintaining the propellants at extremely low temperatures, managing fluid behavior in zero gravity, connecting the spacecraft precisely, and ensuring no contamination enters the system. SpaceX has proposed using Starship's own systems to settle the propellants through gentle thrust before transfer, and developing specialized docking hardware that can safely connect and disconnect after fuel transfer. Demonstrating this technology reliably is one of the critical milestones before Starship HLS can carry crew. Once fully fueled in Earth orbit, Starship HLS fires its engines to escape Earth's gravity and coast to the Moon, a journey taking several days. Unlike the Apollo trajectory, which was carefully optimized to minimize propellant use, Starship's larger propellant capacity allows more direct paths and flexibility in timing. The vehicle can wait in lunar orbit for the crew's Orion spacecraft to arrive, then rendezvous and dock. Docking occurs nose-to-nose, with Orion's docking system connecting to a port on the forward end of Starship. 2 crew members transfer through the docking tunnel into Starship, passing from Orion's relatively compact crew module into the expansive interior of the lander. Starship's crew cabin, located in the forward section of the vehicle, provides private crew quarters, workspace, storage, and an airlock for accessing the exterior. After undocking from Orion, Starship HLS begins its descent to the surface. The vehicle uses 6 Raptor engines, SpaceX's advanced Methalox engines that provide high thrust and efficiency. For landing, only the center engines fire, throttling down to control the descent rate. The engines must be capable of deep throttling, reducing thrust to very low levels to achieve a soft touchdown without launching back into orbit or digging craters beneath the vehicle. Landing legs deploy before touchdown, extending from the lower section of Starship to contact the surface. These legs must support the vehicle's weight in the Moon's gravity while accommodating uneven or sloped ground. The landing system is designed to remain stable on slopes up to about 15 degrees, far more challenging than the relatively flat sites Apollo targeted. One significant challenge with Starship HLS is the height of the crew cabin above the surface. Where Apollo's lunar module had a ladder descending about 10 feet from the hatch to the ground, Starship places the crew cabin over 100 feet up, climbing and descending a ladder. This tall in a bulky spacesuit would be exhausting and dangerous. Instead, SpaceX is developing an elevator system that lowers from the crew cabin to the surface, allowing astronauts to ride down and back up comfortably. The elevator design has evolved through multiple iterations. Early concepts showed an elevator platform descending on cables or rails along the outside of Starship. More recent designs feature an enclosed elevator shaft integrated into the vehicle's structure, protecting astronauts from debris and providing a more controlled environment during ascent and descent. The elevator must operate reliably in the lunar environment, with its extreme temperatures, vacuum, and abrasive dust. Surface operations with Starship HLS differ significantly from Apollo. The larger vehicle can carry scientific instruments, rovers, and construction equipment that would have been impossible for Apollo. It can support surface stays of a week or more, compared to Apollo's maximum of 3 days. The extra space allows astronauts to bring samples inside for preliminary examination, store collected material safely, and maintain equipment between excursions. The vehicle's propellant capacity enables higher payload delivery. Estimates suggest Starship HLS could deliver 20 to 30 metric tons of cargo to the surface, along with crew, compared to the Apollo lunar module's roughly 100 kilograms of scientific equipment. This capacity opens possibilities for establishing infrastructure, deploying habitats, setting up solar power arrays, positioning supplies for future missions, or delivering components of resource extraction systems. When the surface mission concludes, the crew board Starship HLS ascends in the elevator to the cabin and prepares for departure. Unlike Apollo, where the ascent stage separated from the descent stage and left it behind, Starship HLS is a single-stage vehicle that launches as a whole. This simplifies some operations but means lifting significantly more mass back to orbit. The 6 Raptor engines fire, and the vehicle climbs away from the surface, ascending to orbital altitude to rendezvous with Orion. After docking, the crew transfers back to Orion, bringing lunar samples and closing out their time aboard Starship. Orion undocks and begins its return to Earth, while Starship remains in lunar orbit. Unlike Apollo, where all hardware except what landed on Earth was discarded, Starship HLS could potentially be reused for additional missions if refueled in lunar orbit. This reusability is central to making lunar operations sustainable and affordable. Blue Origin's Blue Moon lander, selected for later Artemis missions, takes a more conventional approach. The vehicle more closely resembles traditional lander designs, with a descent stage that remains on the surface and a separate ascent element that returns crew to orbit. Blue Moon uses hydrogen-oxygen engines, different from Starship's methane-oxygen system, providing diversity in propulsion technology and potentially enabling different operational approaches. Blue Moon is designed to land in the lunar South Polar region and support crew for up to a week on the surface. The lander can carry significant cargo and is designed to be refuelable for multiple missions. Unlike Starship, Blue Moon is sized to potentially launch on vehicles other than Blue Origin's own New Glenn rocket, providing flexibility in launch options. Having this alternative system ensures that if one lander encounters problems, the other can continue supporting missions. Both landers face significant development challenges. Beyond the technical hurdles of propulsion, power systems, life support, and navigation, there's the question of dust. Lunar dust is extremely fine, electrostatically charged, and abrasive. It adheres to everything, works into mechanisms, and can cause equipment failures. Apollo astronauts found it coating their suits, equipment, and even inside their spacecraft despite efforts to keep it out. Future landers must manage dust better, with improved seals, cleaning systems, and materials resistant to dust damage. Another challenge is reliability. Apollo accepted risks that would be unacceptable today. Modern spacecraft must demonstrate higher reliability, with extensive testing and redundancy to ensure crew safety. Both Starship HLS and Blue Moon require extensive testing before NASA will certify them for crewed operations. This includes ground tests of all systems, uncrewed demonstration missions to the Moon, and validation of critical capabilities like propellant transfer and landing precision. The development of these human landing systems represents one of the longest poles in the Artemis schedule. Unlike Orion and SLS, which had been in development for years before Artemis was named, the landers started later and involve more unproven technologies. SpaceX's aggressive development approach pushes Starship through rapid test iterations, accepting failures as learning opportunities. This has resulted in spectacular explosions during some test flights, each one teaching lessons that inform the next design. By late 2025, Starship had conducted several high-altitude test flights, demonstrating key technologies like landing flip maneuvers and engine relighting. Orbital test flights revealed challenges with thermal protection during re-entry and control surfaces, leading to design changes. Each test brought the vehicle closer to operational capability, but the gap between current performance and what's needed for reliable lunar missions remains significant. For the landers to support Artemis surface missions, they must mature from experimental vehicles into operational spacecraft with demonstrated reliability. This maturation takes time, testing, and often setbacks. But the potential reward is enormous. Sustainable access to the lunar surface with vehicles that can deliver the cargo and support the duration of stay needed to establish permanent human presence. Artemis 3 is just the beginning. NASA envisions a cadence of missions that will gradually build infrastructure and capabilities on the Moon, transforming from brief visits to sustained presence. The missions beyond Artemis 3 will expand exploration, develop resources, and prepare humanity for eventual journeys to Mars. Artemis 4, currently planned to follow the first landing, will focus on gateway assembly and operations. The mission will deliver the International Habitation Module to Gateway, expanding the station's capacity. Crew will spend time aboard Gateway conducting research and testing systems. They may also perform a lunar landing, though this depends on lander availability and mission readiness. Artemis 4 represents the transition from proving basic capabilities to beginning operational use of the Artemis architecture. Subsequent missions will follow at roughly annual intervals, though the exact schedule depends on budgets, hardware readiness, and mission priorities. Each mission will have specific objectives, exploring different regions of the Moon, deploying scientific instruments, testing new technologies, or delivering components of surface infrastructure. The long-term vision involves establishing Artemis Base Camp, a semi-permanent facility at the lunar South Pole. This wouldn't be a traditional building with walls and airlocks, at least not initially. Rather, it would start as a collection of assets that enable sustained human presence, habitats where astronauts can live, rovers for transportation and exploration, power systems to generate electricity, and communication relays to maintain contact with Earth. The habitats under consideration vary in design. Some concepts envision inflatable structures that launch compact but expand on the Moon to provide living space. These modules, made from advanced fabrics with radiation shielding, could offer more volume per launch mass than rigid metal structures. Other designs use rigid, prefabricated habitats that can be connected together to form larger complexes. Still others explore in-situ resource utilization, using lunar regolith as construction material, either by melting it into building blocks or using it as radiation shielding piled around inflatable structures. A key element of Artemis Base Camp is mobility. Unlike Apollo, where astronauts explored on foot or used a rover that travelled at most 6 miles from the lander, future missions will use pressurized rovers that allow astronauts to travel much farther while remaining in shirt-sleeve comfort. These rovers would serve as both transportation and temporary habitats, enabling expeditions lasting days or even weeks away from the main base. The Lunar Terrain Vehicle, or LTV, is being developed through commercial contracts. Several companies have proposed designs, ranging from large enclosed vehicles to smaller unpressurized rovers, more like the Apollo Lunar Roving Vehicle, but with enhanced capabilities. The winning design will need to operate reliably in the harsh lunar environment, navigate rough terrain, and support astronauts for extended periods. NASA has also discussed the surface habitation and logistics requirements, or SHABL, focusing on cargo delivery to the surface. Future missions will need to transport significant mass, habitat modules, scientific equipment, life support systems, power generators, fuel storage, and supplies. Specialized cargo landers derived from human landing systems could deliver these payloads without crew, pre-positioning assets for later missions. Power generation presents a significant challenge. Solar power is the obvious choice. The Moon has no atmosphere to scatter sunlight, and panels can be very efficient. However, each lunar day lasts about 14 Earth days, followed by an equally long night. Near the South Pole, some elevated areas receive sunlight almost continuously, but these sites are limited and may not be ideal for other reasons. Permanently shadowed craters, where water ice exists, receive no sunlight at all. The solution likely involves a combination of approaches. Solar arrays on elevated peaks of eternal light could generate power during the long lunar day and charge large battery systems to provide power during the night. Small nuclear reactors, which NASA is developing through the Fission Surface Power Project, could provide constant power regardless of sunlight. These reactors would be compact, safe, and reliable, generating about 40 kilowatts of electrical power for years without refueling. Water ice in the permanently shadowed regions offers another critical resource. While the ice could be used directly for drinking after purification, its real value lies in propellant production. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis. Liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen are powerful rocket propellants, the same combination that fuels SLS's core stage. Producing propellant on the Moon, rather than bringing it from Earth, reduces the mass that must be launched, making missions more affordable and sustainable. Extracting and processing this water ice is technologically challenging. The ice is likely mixed with regolith, perhaps at concentrations of just a few percent. It lies in regions that are among the coldest places in the solar system, below -300 degrees Fahrenheit. Mining equipment must operate in these temperatures, in darkness, and return the ice-bearing regolith to processing facilities where it can be heated to release the water vapour, captured and purified. Several demonstration missions are planned to test ice extraction technologies before human missions depend on them. Robotic landers will travel to permanently shadowed regions, drill into the regolith, extract samples, and heat them to quantify ice content. These missions will provide ground truth data on how much ice exists, how it's distributed, and how easily it can be accessed. Communication infrastructure is another element of the lunar base concept. Earth is visible from much of the Moon's near side, allowing direct line-of-sight communication. However, terrain can block signals, particularly in the cratered polar regions. The lunar far side never sees Earth directly and requires relay satellites to communicate. NASA plans to deploy a constellation of small satellites around the Moon, providing continuous communication coverage for surface assets and enabling real-time voice and video even from far-side locations. Scientific research will be a major focus of sustained lunar presence. The Moon offers a unique laboratory for multiple disciplines. Geologists can study the Moon's formation and evolution, testing theories about solar system history. Astronomers can place telescopes on the far side, shielded from Earth's radio interference, opening windows on the universe impossible to access from Earth. Biologists can study how living organisms adapt to lunar gravity and radiation. Engineers can test technologies in a realistic environment before committing them to Mars missions. One particularly exciting possibility is using the Moon as a testbed for closed-loop life support systems. On Earth, nature recycles everything. Plants produce oxygen, microbes break down waste, water circulates through evaporation and precipitation. Space stations have partially closed loops, recycling some water and oxygen, but still requiring resupply from Earth. A truly self-sufficient Mars mission would need nearly perfect recycling, with minimal resupply. Testing and refining these systems on the Moon, where resupply is possible within days if needed, reduces the risk of deploying them on a Mars mission where help is months away. The economic potential of the Moon is speculative but intriguing. Beyond water for propellant, the Moon has other resources that might prove valuable. Rare earth elements used in electronics are present in lunar regolith. Helium-3, a rare isotope that could potentially fuel fusion reactors, exists in lunar soil deposited by the solar wind. Whether these resources can be extracted economically and whether there's a market that justifies lunar mining remains uncertain. But establishing human presence on the Moon creates the opportunity to investigate these possibilities. Private companies are increasingly interested in lunar activities. Astrobotic, Intuitive Machines, and other firms are developing commercial lunar landers through NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. These companies see potential in delivering payloads to the Moon for government agencies, research institutions, and eventually private customers. Some envision lunar tourism, though the costs would be astronomical for the foreseeable future. Others imagine lunar manufacturing, using resources and conditions unique to the Moon to produce goods that can't be made on Earth. The timeline for establishing a permanent lunar base extends over decades. The first landings in the late 2020s will prove capabilities and identify challenges. The 2030s might see annual or more frequent missions, gradually building up infrastructure. By the 2040s, if development proceeds steadily, there could be continuous human presence on the Moon, similar to what Antarctica experiences with its research stations. Small populations rotating through, supported by infrastructure that persists between rotations. This vision requires sustained investment, which is never guaranteed in government programs. Space exploration competes with other priorities for funding. And political support can shift with administrations. International partnerships help distribute costs and build broader support, but they also add coordination complexity. The success of Artemis Base Camp depends not just on technology, but on maintaining organizational and political will over the long term. Despite uncertainties, progress towards sustained lunar presence continues. Hardware is being developed. Technologies are being tested. Operational concepts are being refined. Each Artemis mission builds on previous ones, creating a foundation that makes the next step possible. The moon is becoming less of a destination and more of a place where humans can work, explore, and eventually live. From the beginning, Artemis has been conceived as an international program. While NASA leads the effort, space agencies from around the world contribute hardware, expertise, and resources. This collaboration distributes costs, brings diverse capabilities, and builds a coalition supporting lunar exploration. It also establishes frameworks for cooperation that could shape space activities for decades to come. The most significant partner is the European Space Agency, which represents 22 member states. ESA's contributions to Artemis are substantial. The agency developed the European Service Module for Orion, providing propulsion, power, and life support for NASA's deep space spacecraft. This partnership builds on ESA's experience with automated cargo vehicles that supplied the International Space Station. ESA is also contributing modules to Gateway and developing systems for surface infrastructure. Canada, through the Canadian Space Agency, provides advanced robotics. The Canadarm systems used on the Space Shuttle and ISS demonstrated Canada's expertise in space robotics. For Artemis, Canada is developing Canadarm3, a next-generation robotic system for Gateway. In exchange for this contribution, Canada receives opportunities to fly astronauts on Artemis missions. Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen is part of the Artemis II crew, marking Canada's first deep space, human spaceflight participation. Japan's space agency, JAXA, is contributing to Gateway through habitat modules and logistics systems. Japan has extensive experience with spacecraft and space station modules, demonstrated through its Kaibo laboratory on the ISS and its HTV cargo vehicles. For Artemis, JAXA is developing elements that will expand Gateway's capabilities and support sustained operations. Japan has also expressed interest in contributing to surface exploration through rovers or other systems. The United Kingdom Space Agency, though not part of ESA for some programs after Brexit, is contributing to Artemis through ESA and independently. UK companies are developing technologies for communications, life support, and other systems. The UK has identified space exploration as a strategic priority and sees Artemis as an opportunity to build its space industry capabilities. The United Arab Emirates has emerged as an active Artemis partner. The UAE's Space Agency and its astronaut corps are participating in Artemis planning, and the nation is contributing to Gateway development. A UAE astronaut is expected to fly to Gateway as part of the international crew rotation. The UAE's involvement reflects the broader geographic diversity of Artemis compared to Apollo, which was primarily a US program with limited international participation. Italy contributes through both ESA and its National Space Agency, ASI. Italian aerospace companies have long experience building pressurized modules for space stations. Thales Alenia Space in Italy is constructing major Gateway modules. Italy's expertise in space structures and life support systems makes it a valuable partner in developing sustainable lunar infrastructure. Australia participates through its space agency and research institutions, focusing on areas like communications infrastructure and resource processing technologies. Australia's experience with remote operations and mining could inform lunar resource extraction concepts. The country is also developing ground station capabilities to support lunar missions. Many other nations have signed the Artemis Accords, a set of principles governing cooperation in lunar exploration. The Accords, introduced in October 2020, establish guidelines based on the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. They address issues like peaceful exploration, transparency of activities, interoperability of systems, emergency assistance, registration of space objects, release of scientific data, protection of heritage sites, management of space resources, deconfliction of activities and minimization of orbital debris. The Heritage Site Protection Principle specifically addresses Apollo landing sites, which contain artifacts from the first human missions to the Moon. The Accords establish that nations should avoid harmful interference with these sites, preserving them for their historical and scientific value. Similarly, sites associated with other nations' lunar activities should be respected. The space resource provisions are particularly significant. The Accords affirm that extracting and using space resources is permitted under international law. This addresses a long-standing ambiguity in the Outer Space Treaty, which prohibits national appropriation of celestial bodies but doesn't explicitly address resource extraction. The Accords follow the interpretation that while nations can't claim sovereignty over the Moon, they can extract and use resources found there, similar to how fishing vessels can catch fish in international waters without owning the ocean. Not all spacefaring nations have signed the Accords. Russia declined, objecting to what it sees as US-dominated framework that bypasses United Nations processes for establishing space governance. China has also not signed, pursuing its own international lunar research station concept with Russia and other partners. This bifurcation creates separate coalitions for lunar exploration, though both sides maintain that they support peaceful scientific investigation. The division reflects broader geopolitical tensions. The Artemis Accords coalition largely aligns with US allies and partners, while Russia and China lead an alternative grouping. Some observers worry this could lead to competition or conflict over lunar resources or strategic locations. Others argue that multiple programs create healthy competition and provide alternative paths for nations to participate in lunar exploration. The Accords also address newer space activities like in-situ resource utilization and commercial operations. As private companies become more involved in space, clarifying legal frameworks becomes important. The Accords provide some clarity, establishing that commercial activities are permitted and that nations signing the Accords will provide authorization and continuing supervision of private entities conducting Artemis activities under their jurisdiction. International cooperation in Artemis faces challenges. Different nations have different capabilities, priorities, and resources to contribute. Coordinating schedules across multiple space agencies, each with their own funding cycles and approval processes, is complex. Technical interfaces between systems developed by different countries must be carefully designed and tested. Cultural and language differences require clear communication protocols. Despite challenges, the benefits of cooperation are substantial. Sharing costs makes ambitious missions more affordable for all participants. Different nations bring different expertise and capabilities, creating a more robust and diverse program. International participation builds political support that helps sustain programs through budget pressures and changing administrations. Perhaps most importantly, cooperation establishes space exploration as a shared human endeavour rather than a competitive national enterprise. The model established by the International Space Station demonstrates that sustained international cooperation in space is possible. ISS has operated continuously for over 2 decades, despite occasional political tensions between partner nations. Astronauts and cosmonauts from different countries live and work together, conducting research that benefits all humanity. The station proves that when humans cooperate in space, the results far exceed what any single nation could achieve alone. Artemis builds on this foundation while extending it to deep space. Gateway will be an international outpost where crew from multiple nations work together beyond Earth orbit. Surface missions will include astronauts from partner countries exploring the moon side by side. Scientific discoveries will be shared openly, advancing human knowledge. Technologies developed for Artemis will benefit industries and societies worldwide. Looking ahead, the partnerships formed through Artemis will likely shape future deep space exploration. The same nations cooperating on lunar missions may eventually collaborate on Mars expeditions. The frameworks established by the Artemis Accords could evolve into broader space governance systems as human activities expand throughout the solar system. The spirit of cooperation, if maintained and strengthened, could help ensure that space remains a domain of peaceful exploration and scientific discovery. The story of Artemis is still being written. Hardware continues to be developed and tested. Astronauts train for missions that will push them farther from Earth than anyone has travelled in over half a century. Engineers solve problems and refine designs. International partners coordinate contributions. Slowly, steadily, the pieces come together. Artemis represents more than a return to the moon. It marks a fundamental shift in how humanity approaches space exploration. Where Apollo was about reaching the moon to prove it could be done, Artemis is about learning to live and work there sustainably. Where Apollo was a sprint driven by Cold War competition, Artemis is a marathon enabled by international cooperation. Where Apollo ended after 6 successful landings, Artemis aims to begin something that will last. The program faces challenges. Technical problems must be solved. Schedules will likely slip further as complex systems are tested and refined. Budgets will be scrutinized as costs accumulate. Political support must be maintained across multiple administrations and changing priorities. These are formidable obstacles, and there are no guarantees of success. Yet the progress made so far is encouraging. SLS has flown, proving that a heavy-lift rocket can send significant mass beyond Earth orbit. Orion has journeyed to the moon and returned safely, demonstrating that deep space spacecraft can protect crew during the voyage. Gateway modules are being built. Landing systems are advancing through test flights. Astronauts are preparing for missions. International partnerships are solidifying. The foundation exists. Looking beyond the initial Artemis missions, the moon offers stepping stones to even more ambitious goals. Technologies tested on the moon will enable Mars missions. Closed-loop life support, in-situ resource utilization, autonomous operations, long-duration human spaceflight beyond Earth's magnetosphere. Operational experience gained from managing lunar base camps will inform planning for Mars bases. International frameworks established for lunar cooperation could extend to Mars and beyond. The moon itself has much to teach us. Its rocks preserve a record of the solar system's first billion years, a history erased on Earth by plate tectonics and erosion. Permanently shadowed craters hold ice that might preserve ancient organic molecules or even cometary material. The lunar interior remains largely unknown. Only through sustained exploration, with modern instruments, will we understand how the moon formed and evolved. The far side offers pristine radio-quiet environments for astronomy impossible to find on Earth. There are practical benefits as well. Technologies developed for lunar operations often find applications on Earth. Water purification systems, advanced materials, life support technologies, solar power systems, and remote operations capabilities all have terrestrial uses. Economic activity in space, whether resource extraction, manufacturing or services, could eventually create new industries and opportunities. Space exploration inspires young people to pursue science and engineering careers, building the workforce that drives innovation. Perhaps most importantly, Artemis represents hope. It demonstrates that humanity can work together toward shared goals. It shows that we can venture beyond our home planet, expanding the sphere of human activity and understanding. It reminds us that exploration is fundamentally human, that the urge to discover what lies beyond the horizon drives progress. The Apollo program produced one of the most iconic photographs ever taken, Earthrise, the image of Earth rising above the lunar horizon, captured by Apollo 8 astronauts on Christmas Eve, 1968. That photograph changed how humans saw their home, revealing a beautiful, fragile world suspended in cosmic darkness. It helped inspire the environmental movement and reminded people that national boundaries are invisible from space, that Earth is a shared home. Artemis will produce its own images. Astronauts will photograph Earth from lunar orbit once again, but this time in high-definition colour with modern cameras. They'll capture video of their colleagues working on the surface, conducting science, exploring. They'll document the establishment of the first human outpost on another world. These images will inspire the next generation, showing them that space exploration is not ancient history but present reality. When the first Artemis astronauts step onto the moon, over half a century after the last Apollo crew departed, they'll stand on ground that holds meaning beyond geology. The lunar surface is where humans proved they could reach beyond Earth. It's where we've taken our first halting steps toward becoming a spacefaring species. Those steps were interrupted, paused for decades, but now they resume. The journey ahead is long. Establishing permanent human presence on the moon will take decades. Mistakes will be made and lessons learned. Some missions will face setbacks. Hardware will fail and need to be redesigned. Budgets will fluctuate. Political landscapes will shift. But if the commitment holds, if international cooperation strengthens rather than fractures, if the vision of humanity as a spacefaring species continues to inspire, then the moon will gradually transform from a destination we visit into a place where we belong. The Artemis astronauts will leave behind more than footprints. They'll leave habitats, scientific instruments, power systems, communication relays, and rovers. They'll leave infrastructure that future missions will build upon. Each crew will add to what previous crews established, gradually creating a human presence that persists between missions and eventually becomes continuous. Future generations may look back on this era as the time when humanity truly began expanding beyond Earth. They might study Artemis missions the way we study early Antarctic expeditions or the first voyages across oceans. They might live and work on the moon, considering it not as an alien world, but as simply another place where humans can be found. They might launch from the moon toward Mars, Jupiter's moons, or destinations we haven't yet imagined, using resources and infrastructure that Artemis began creating. The vision is ambitious, perhaps audacious. It requires sustained effort over decades, coordination across nations, and technologies that push the boundaries of what's possible. It demands resources that could be spent on other priorities. It accepts risks that could result in tragedy. Yet throughout human history, exploration has always required these commitments. The result has been expanded knowledge, new capabilities, and the satisfaction of curiosity about what lies beyond. The moon waits as it has for billions of years, patient and unchanging. It doesn't care whether humans return or not, but we care. We're drawn to it, pulled by curiosity, ambition, and the ancient human need to explore. Through Artemis, we're answering that call, returning to the moon not because it's easy, as President Kennedy once noted, but because it's hard, because that challenge organises and measures the best of our energies and skills. As you rest tonight, perhaps under the light of that same moon, know that humans are preparing to return there. Engineers are solving problems, astronauts are training, rockets are being built, international partners are collaborating. The dream of sustained human presence beyond Earth is becoming reality, step by careful step. The Artemis program embodies something essential about humanity. We don't stay still. We wonder what's over the horizon, up the mountain, across the sea, beyond the sky. We build tools to reach those places. We take risks to discover what's there. We learn, adapt, and reach further. The moon is the next horizon, and we're going there to stay. While the broad architecture of Artemis has been established, numerous technical challenges remain before the program achieves its goals. Understanding these challenges provides context for why timelines shift and why sustained effort is necessary. The heat shield issue discovered after Artemis 1 exemplifies the kind of unexpected problem that space programs encounter. During re-entry, some of the AVCOAT ablative material charred and came away from the shield in larger pieces than modelling predicted. This phenomenon, while not threatening to the mission, needs to be thoroughly understood before crew flies. Engineers are conducting extensive testing, creating samples that match the flight article, subjecting them to re-entry conditions in ArcJet facilities, and analysing the results in detail. Several hypotheses exist about what caused the anomalous shedding. The material might have absorbed moisture during the months Orion spent on the pad before Artemis 1 launched. Thermal stresses during re-entry might have created cracks that propagated differently than expected. The skip entry trajectory might have subjected the shield to conditions that ground tests didn't fully replicate. Each hypothesis is being tested systematically, and the solution might involve modifications to the shield material, changes to manufacturing processes, adjustments to the re-entry trajectory, or improvements to how the shield is stored and protected before flight. This investigation takes time because crew safety cannot be compromised. NASA must understand not just what happened, but why, and demonstrate that the problem is resolved before putting astronauts at risk. This methodical approach, while frustrating to those eager to see missions proceed, reflects the hard lessons learned from previous accidents. The Columbia disaster in 2003, caused by foam insulation damage to the shuttle's heat shield that went unaddressed, demonstrated that seemingly minor anomalies can have catastrophic consequences. Life support systems present another set of challenges. The Orion Environmental Control and Life Support System must provide breathable air, remove carbon dioxide and other contaminants, control temperature and humidity, provide water, and manage waste for up to 21 days. Each of these functions involves complex chemistry and engineering. The system must work reliably in zero gravity, where fluids behave differently than on Earth, and in the radiation environment of deep space, which can degrade materials and affect chemical processes. Testing life support systems comprehensively is difficult. Ground tests can simulate many conditions, but subtle interactions between systems sometimes only become apparent in actual spaceflight. The system aboard Artemis 1 operated well during its uncrewed test, but supporting actual humans with their metabolic needs and waste products introduces additional complexity. Artemis 2 will provide the first real test of the life support system with crew aboard, and the data gathered will inform refinements for subsequent missions. Gateway faces technical challenges related to its operational environment. The station will experience temperature swings more extreme than the ISS as it moves through sunlight and shadow. It will be exposed to higher radiation levels, which can degrade electronics and materials over time. Its autonomous operations must be extremely reliable, since crew won't always be present to respond to problems. Communication delays, while small at about 3 seconds round trip, still complicates some operations compared to ISS, where near instantaneous communication is possible. The development of gateway modules has revealed typical spacecraft development challenges: mass growth, system integration issues, software development complexities, and schedule pressures. The power and propulsion element, originally based on a satellite bus that Maxar had previously built, required substantial modifications for Gateway's unique requirements. These changes increased development time and cost. Halo, derived from Northrop Grumman's Cygnus cargo vehicle, similarly required extensive modifications to serve as a crew habitat rather than a cargo carrier. Human landing system development involves perhaps the greatest technical uncertainties in Artemis. Starship is an extraordinarily ambitious vehicle, attempting to achieve full reusability, operate in multiple environments from Earth's atmosphere to the lunar surface, and leverage technologies like orbital refueling that have never been demonstrated at the required scale. SpaceX's test program has shown both the promise and the challenges of the approach. Starship test flights have demonstrated major milestones: successful belly flop landing maneuvers, engine relighting in space, controlled re-entry, and successful landings. However, several flights have ended in explosions or crashes as systems were pushed to their limits. Each failure teaches lessons that inform design improvements, but accumulating enough successful flights to demonstrate reliability takes time. The orbital refueling challenge is particularly significant. Transferring hundreds of tons of cryogenic propellant in orbit has never been attempted. The propellants must be kept at extremely low temperatures, below -300 degrees Fahrenheit. In zero gravity, fluids don't settle. Surface tension dominates, causing propellants to form bubbles and float unpredictably. Managing propellant transfer requires techniques to settle the fluids, precise control of temperature and pressure, and reliable docking mechanisms that can connect and disconnect while handling these conditions. SpaceX plans to demonstrate orbital propellant transfer through a series of test missions. Initial tests will transfer small amounts of propellant between tanks within a single Starship to verify the basic concepts. Later tests will involve transferring propellant between two Starships docked in orbit. Eventually, the full mission profile will be demonstrated, launching a depot Starship, launching multiple tanker Starships to refuel the depot, then launching a lunar Starship that docks with the depot to fill its tanks before departing for the Moon. Each of these steps involves risks. Docking large vehicles in orbit is always challenging. Doing so while connected to transfer lines carrying cryogenic fluids adds complexity. A failure during transfer could damage both vehicles. Propellant could freeze lines or valves, leak into space, or cause pressure issues. These risks can be mitigated through careful design, extensive testing, and operational procedures, but they cannot be eliminated entirely. The elevator system for Starship HLS represents another technical challenge. Carrying astronauts over 100 feet in a moving platform in the lunar environment requires reliable mechanical systems, electrical power, and controls. The elevator must handle the weight of two astronauts in their spacesuits, about 700 pounds on the Moon. It must operate reliably despite lunar dust, which will inevitably contaminate mechanisms. Temperature extremes from -250 degrees in shadow to +250 degrees in sunlight will stress materials and lubricants. SpaceX is developing the elevator through iterative design, building prototypes and testing them in simulated lunar conditions. The system will likely include redundancies, multiple cables or support mechanisms, so that a single failure doesn't strand astronauts. Emergency descent capabilities will allow astronauts to return to the surface quickly, if needed. The design must balance reliability, mass complexity, and cost. Spacesuits for Artemis surface operations, being developed by Axiom Space, face their own challenges. The suits must provide better mobility than Apollo suits while protecting astronauts from vacuum, temperature extremes, radiation, and dust. They must accommodate a wider range of body sizes to ensure all astronauts can wear them comfortably. Life support systems must be reliable for 8-hour EVAs. The suits must be reusable for multiple excursions rather than single use like Apollo suits essentially were. Lunar dust is perhaps the most insidious challenge. The dust is extremely fine, sharp-edged because there's no erosion to round the particles, and electrostatically charged due to solar wind bombardment. It sticks to everything: suits, gloves, visors, tools, equipment. It works into seals and mechanisms, causing wear and potential failures. Apollo astronauts found that dust brought inside their spacecraft caused respiratory irritation and damaged equipment. Mitigating dust requires multiple approaches. Suit designs can minimize areas where dust accumulates. Materials can be selected for resistance to dust abrasion. Equipment can be designed to tolerate dust contamination or include cleaning systems. Airlocks can be designed to minimize dust entering habitats. But dust cannot be eliminated entirely. It's an environmental factor that must be managed through good operational procedures and robust engineering. Communications infrastructure for sustained lunar operations requires careful planning. The Moon rotates slowly, taking about 27 days to turn once relative to the Sun. This means that a fixed location on the surface sees Earth set and rise over a 2-week cycle. During the approximately 2 weeks when Earth is below the horizon, direct communication is impossible without relay satellites. NASA plans to deploy a constellation of small satellites around the Moon to provide continuous communication coverage. These satellites will relay signals between surface assets, orbiting spacecraft, and Earth. The constellation must be designed carefully to ensure that at least one satellite is always visible from any location on the lunar surface, including the polar regions and far side. This requires multiple satellites in precisely planned orbits. The development and deployment of this communications constellation involves typical satellite program challenges. Designing spacecraft that can survive the radiation environment around the Moon, launching them affordably, precisely deploying them into their planned orbits, and operating them reliably for years. The system must also be interoperable, allowing spacecraft from different nations and companies to use the network. Power systems for lunar surface operations must handle the long lunar night at most locations. Near the poles, elevated areas receiving near-constant sunlight simplify power generation through solar arrays. However, working in permanently shadowed craters where water ice exists requires alternative power sources. Small nuclear reactors offer a solution, but developing them involves regulatory hurdles, public perception challenges, and technical complexities of reactor control, heat rejection, and long-term reliability in the lunar environment. Resource extraction systems must prove they can find, excavate, process, and store lunar resources at a scale that makes a difference to operations. Demonstration missions can prove concepts, but scaling up to production levels that actually reduce the mass launched from Earth is a major step. The equipment must be reliable enough to operate for extended periods, with minimal maintenance in a harsh environment. Processing facilities must handle the bulk regolith, extract resources efficiently, and deal with waste products. These technical challenges are not insurmountable. Each has solutions that engineers are developing and testing. but they require time, resources, and often multiple iterations to get right. This is why space programs rarely meet their initial schedules. The complexity of developing systems that must work reliably in extreme environments leads to unexpected problems that take time to solve. The challenge is compounded by the public and political desire for rapid progress. When timelines slip, it can erode confidence and support, even though the delays often reflect prudent engineering rather than failure. Managing expectations while maintaining momentum is a delicate balance that program managers must strike. Perhaps no aspect of Artemis generates more debate than cost. Space exploration is expensive, and in an era of competing priorities and budget constraints, every dollar spent on Artemis is scrutinized. Understanding the financial realities provides important context for the program's challenges. The NASA Inspector General estimated in November 2021 that the Artemis program would cost $93 billion through fiscal year 2025. This includes development costs for SLS, Orion, ground systems, and early gateway elements. The estimate works out to about $4.1 billion per Artemis launch when development costs are included, far higher than the marginal cost of producing and launching additional vehicles once development is complete. These figures have drawn criticism from multiple directions. Commercial space advocates point to SpaceX's Falcon Heavy, which can launch for under $150 million, or the company's Starship, which could eventually launch for even less if full reusability is achieved. They argue that NASA is spending too much on expensive government-developed systems when commercial alternatives exist or are being developed. Others note that the $93 billion figure spans over a decade of development and operations. Annualized, it represents less than 1% of the federal budget, comparable to what NASA received during the Apollo program's peak years. From this perspective, Artemis is affordable if it's prioritized. The cost debate involves several layers of complexity. First, comparing SLS to commercial vehicles isn't entirely straightforward. SLS is designed for specific requirements: human rating to extremely high standards, launching large payloads on trajectories beyond low Earth orbit, and integration with Orion. Commercial vehicles have different design goals and accept different trade-offs. Falcon Heavy cannot launch Orion directly. The interfaces don't exist and would be costly to develop. Starship is not yet operational and faces its own development challenges. Second, SLS development costs include infrastructure like modifications to Launch Complex 39B, the Vehicle Assembly Building, and the Mobile Launcher, facilities that will support not just SLS, but potentially other vehicles in the future. These are one-time investments that benefit multiple programs. Similarly, Orion development costs include safety features and life support systems that commercial crew vehicles to the ISS don't require, because those vehicles stay close to Earth where rescue is possible within hours. Third, SLS sustains a specific industrial base and workforce that NASA and Congress consider strategically important. The rocket is built across the United States, with major contractors and suppliers in many states. This distributed work provides political support, but also reflects a deliberate policy of maintaining domestic aerospace capabilities rather than becoming dependent on a small number of commercial providers. That said, the cost concerns are legitimate. $4 billion per launch is a substantial sum. It limits how frequently missions can fly, which in turn limits what the program can accomplish. If Artemis missions fly annually, that's $4 billion per year just for launches, before accounting for mission operations, spacecraft production, gateway operations, and other costs. With NASA's total budget around $25 billion per year, and with the agency responsible for Earth science, aeronautics research, the ISS, robotic missions throughout the solar system, and numerous other programs, dedicating such a large fraction to Artemis raises opportunity cost questions. NASA has taken steps to control costs. The agency is leveraging commercial services where possible, such as the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program that uses fixed-price contracts to deliver payloads to the Moon. The Human Landing System contracts with SpaceX and Blue Origin are structured to share costs with the companies, reducing NASA's burden. International partnerships distribute gateway development costs across multiple agencies. The agency is also working to reduce the marginal cost of SLS launches by improving production efficiency and reusing some components. The RS-25 engines flying on early SLS missions were built for the Space Shuttle and refurbished for reuse, essentially free since they were already paid for. New RS-25 engines being produced for future missions use modern manufacturing techniques to reduce costs. Similarly, Boeing is streamlining core stage production with lessons learned from building the first units. Despite these efforts, SLS will remain expensive by commercial launch standards. This reality drives some advocates to argue that NASA should abandon SLS and Orion in favour of commercial alternatives. Cancelling the programs now, however, would waste the billions already invested and delay Artemis significantly while alternatives are developed and human-rated. A more pragmatic approach, which NASA seems to be following, is to use SLS and Orion for initial Artemis missions while encouraging commercial development of alternatives that could supplement or eventually replace them. Budget uncertainty is perhaps more challenging than absolute cost. NASA's funding comes through annual congressional appropriations, subject to political negotiations and competing priorities. In some years, Artemis receives more funding than NASA requested, in others less. This unpredictability makes long-term planning difficult. Programs can't hire efficiently if they don't know next year's budget. Contractors can't invest in facilities and workforce without confidence in sustained funding. Artemis competes with other space priorities. The ISS requires substantial annual funding, over $3 billion per year for NASA's share. Robotic missions like the James Webb Space Telescope, Mars rovers, and outer planet explorers also need funding. Earth science missions that monitor climate and environment are considered essential by many. Aeronautics research supports the aviation industry. Each of these programs has constituencies arguing for its importance. Politically, Artemis has maintained bipartisan support, which is unusual in the current environment. Democrats and Republicans in Congress generally agree that returning to the Moon is worthwhile, though they sometimes differ on priorities and implementation details. This broad support has helped sustain the program through multiple administrations. However, support is not unlimited. If costs escalate significantly, or if major failures occur, political backing could erode. Public support for space exploration polls reasonably well, with most Americans agreeing that space exploration is important. However, when asked about priorities, space typically ranks below healthcare, education, infrastructure, and other domestic concerns. Most people support NASA's missions, but don't consider them urgent compared to immediate terrestrial challenges. This creates a political environment where Artemis can continue, but isn't strongly demanded by voters. International cost-sharing helps, but isn't a panacea. Partner nations contribute valuable hardware and expertise, but they also face their own budget constraints and political considerations. ESA's budget is limited and must support numerous programs beyond Artemis. Canada's space agency budget is smaller still. These partners can contribute specific elements, but can't fund major portions of the program. The financial burden for Artemis remains primarily with NASA and the United States. Some analysts have suggested alternative funding mechanisms, such as public-private partnerships, where companies invest in lunar infrastructure in exchange for rights to use it commercially. This could work for elements like lunar landers, where companies might see a business case for delivering cargo to the moon for various customers. It's harder to apply to elements like Gateway or SLS, which serve primarily government exploration goals without clear commercial revenue streams. The cost question ultimately comes down to priorities and values. Is understanding the moon, learning to live beyond Earth, inspiring future generations, and advancing space technology worth tens of billions of dollars over a decade or more? Different people reach different conclusions. Those who value exploration, see strategic importance in space capabilities, or believe humanity's future involves expansion beyond Earth tend to support the investment. Those who prioritize addressing terrestrial challenges, question government spending generally, or doubt the value of human spaceflight tend to oppose it. What's clear is that Artemis will continue only with sustained political and public support, which in turn requires demonstrating value and managing costs effectively. Successful missions that capture imagination and produce scientific results help build that support. Cost overruns, delays, and failures erode it. The program walks a constant tightrope between ambition and affordability. Beyond hardware and budgets, Artemis has cultural significance that's difficult to quantify, but nonetheless important. The program represents humanity's aspirations, our collective dreams of exploration and discovery. Understanding these dimensions helps explain why many people support space exploration despite its costs and challenges. The Apollo program left an indelible mark on culture. Images of astronauts on the moon, Earthrise, and the famous blue marble photograph of Earth became iconic. Apollo demonstrated that humans could achieve seemingly impossible goals through ingenuity, determination, and cooperation. The program inspired generations of scientists, engineers, and explorers. Many people working on Artemis today were motivated to pursue their careers by watching Apollo missions or learning about them in school. The inspirational impact extended beyond space careers. Apollo showed that audacious goals could be achieved, encouraging ambitious thinking in many fields. The famous quote attributed to aerospace engineer Kelly Johnson, "Everything is possible given enough time and money," captures the Apollo-era optimism. While this optimism may have been naive in some respects, it drove remarkable achievements. Artemis aims to inspire similarly, but in a different context. The world today is more cynical, more aware of limitations, more divided. Inspiring new generations requires not just technical achievement, but also connecting space exploration to values people care about: diversity, sustainability, international cooperation, and solving problems. The commitment to land the first woman and first person of colour on the moon speaks directly to inclusivity. Representation matters. Seeing people who look like you achieving remarkable things expands your sense of what's possible. The Artemis astronaut corps is deliberately diverse, reflecting society more broadly than the exclusively white male Apollo crews. This diversity isn't just about fairness. It brings different perspectives and approaches that make the program stronger. Christina Koch, flying on Artemis 2, and the yet-to-be-named female astronaut who will land on the moon with Artemis 3 will become role models for girls and women worldwide. Victor Glover, the first black astronaut to travel to the moon, similarly represents inspiration for underrepresented communities. These individuals aren't selected for their demographics alone. They're highly qualified professionals who also happen to expand the face of exploration. The international nature of Artemis sends messages about cooperation. At a time when international relations often focus on competition and conflict, space exploration demonstrates that nations can work together toward common goals. The sight of astronauts from different countries working side by side on the Moon could remind people that we're all part of one species sharing one planet, that national boundaries are less important than our common humanity. The sustainability focus of Artemis also resonates culturally. Unlike Apollo's flags and footprints approach, Artemis aims to establish lasting presence. This mirrors growing awareness that extractive, wasteful approaches to resources aren't sustainable. Learning to live within the constraints of a harsh environment, recycling everything possible, using local resources rather than importing everything from home, these principles apply on Earth as much as on the Moon. Science fiction has long imagined lunar bases, colonies, and eventual expansion throughout the solar system. Artemis begins turning fiction into fact. While the reality will be less glamorous than movies and books portray, it's no less significant. The first crews on the Moon will be pioneers in the truest sense, venturing into unknown territory and learning whether humans can really make homes beyond Earth. The program also engages public imagination through outreach and education. NASA involves schools through programs that allow students to participate in aspects of missions, analyze data, or propose experiments. Social media brings space exploration into people's daily lives through stunning images, behind-the-scenes content, and opportunities to ask questions of astronauts and engineers. Live broadcasts of launches, landings, and surface activities will draw global audiences. There's also philosophical significance. Humans exploring the Moon represents our species taking responsibility for its own future. Life on Earth has been nearly extinguished several times by asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, and other catastrophes. While the likelihood of such events in our lifetimes is small, the long-term survival of humanity may depend on becoming a multi-planet species. The Moon is our first step toward that capability. This existential argument for space exploration doesn't resonate with everyone. Critics reasonably point out that we face urgent challenges on Earth, climate change, poverty, disease, conflict that require immediate attention. They argue that resources spent on space exploration could address these problems more directly. This is a valid perspective, though it's worth noting that the resources devoted to space are a tiny fraction of what societies spend on other pursuits, and that technological advances from space programs often benefit Earth-bound applications. Another cultural dimension involves the question of who benefits from space exploration. If lunar resources are eventually exploited commercially, who owns them and who profits? The Outer Space Treaty declares that space is the province of all mankind, but it allows nations and entities to extract and use resources. Will wealthy nations and companies claim the most valuable locations, leaving others behind? Or will frameworks like the Artemis Accords ensure more equitable access? These questions don't have easy answers, but they're important to address. Space exploration could either replicate the colonial patterns of Earth's past, with powerful entities exploiting resources while excluding others, or it could establish new paradigms of cooperation and shared benefit. The choices made now through programs like Artemis and agreements like the Accords will shape space activity for decades or centuries to come. There's also the simple wonder of exploration. Humans are curious by nature. We want to know what's over the horizon, what's possible, what we might discover. This curiosity drove our ancestors to explore every corner of Earth and now drives us to explore beyond. There's value in exploration for its own sake, in satisfying that curiosity and expanding our understanding, even if immediate practical benefits aren't apparent. When the first Artemis astronauts set foot on the moon again, the moment will be broadcast worldwide. Billions of people will watch as humans walk on another world, just as previous generations watched Apollo. For a brief time, national differences and terrestrial concerns may fade as people collectively marvel at what we've achieved. That sense of shared accomplishment and wonder, difficult to measure but nonetheless real, is part of what makes Artemis worthwhile. If Artemis succeeds in establishing sustained human presence on the moon, what comes next? NASA and its partners have outlined visions that extend decades into the future, though specific plans remain fluid and dependent on many factors. The most commonly discussed long-term goal is Mars. The red planet has captivated imagination for over a century. From Percival Lowell's mistaken observations of canals to the rovers currently exploring its surface, Mars is similar enough to Earth to be potentially habitable, different enough to be fascinating. It has seasons, polar ice caps, ancient river valleys, and possibly subsurface liquid water. If life ever arose there or still exists in protected niches, the discovery would rank among the most profound in history. However, Mars is vastly more challenging to reach than the Moon. The Moon is 3 days away. Mars is 6 to 9 months depending on planetary positions. The Moon is always visible and reachable. Mars is optimally positioned for travel only once every 26 months, when Earth and Mars align favourably. Communication with the Moon has minimal delay. Mars communication has delays of up to 20 minutes each way, making real-time conversation impossible. Landing on Mars requires dealing with an atmosphere, unlike the Moon's vacuum, but that atmosphere is too thin to slow spacecraft much with parachutes alone. Mars missions must carry far more supplies, since resupply isn't possible. Radiation exposure during the months-long journey is significant. The gravity on Mars, about 38% of Earth's, is healthier than the Moon's 1/6, but still presents questions about long-term human health. And the return journey requires launching from Mars, which means either bringing propellant from Earth or producing it on Mars from local resources. The Moon serves as a proving ground for many technologies Mars will require. Life support systems must be highly reliable and efficient, far more so than ISS systems. In situ resource utilization, using local materials to create propellant, water and oxygen, is essential for Mars sustainability and can be developed and tested on the Moon first. Long-duration habitats, power systems, radiation protection, medical capabilities, all can be tested in lunar conditions before committing them to Mars missions where failure is far more serious. Gateway or similar orbital stations might serve as assembly points for Mars expeditions. Spacecraft heading to Mars could be constructed in lunar orbit using materials and propellant sourced from the Moon. This would reduce the mass that must be lifted from Earth's deep gravity well, making missions more affordable. The Moon could become infrastructure supporting Mars exploration rather than a destination in its own right. Some visions envision a Moon Village concept proposed by ESA, where multiple nations and entities establish facilities near each other, sharing some infrastructure while pursuing their own objectives. This could grow organically over decades, with new modules, laboratories and industrial facilities added as capabilities and ambitions expand. Eventually, it might become a genuine settlement, though whether hundreds or thousands of people would ever live on the Moon remains speculative. Commercial activities could accelerate lunar development. If lunar resources prove economically viable, perhaps water ice for propellant, rare earth elements for electronics, or helium-3 for potential future fusion reactors, private investment could flow into the Moon. Mining companies, processing facilities, transportation services, and support infrastructure might emerge, driven by profit rather than exploration. This commercial activity could make sustained presence more affordable by sharing costs across government and private sectors. Tourism is often mentioned, though the costs will remain prohibitive for all but the ultra-wealthy for the foreseeable future. A lunar orbit trip on Starship, once operational, might cost tens of millions of dollars per passenger. A surface stay would cost even more, given the additional complexity. Over decades, as technology improves and scales up, costs might decline to where wealthy tourists could afford lunar visits. Whether there's sufficient market for this to support sustained commercial activity is unclear. Scientific research will remain a driver of lunar activity regardless of commercial developments. The Moon offers unique opportunities, studying the Sun from a stable platform, observing Earth's climate and environment, investigating lunar geology and the early solar system's history, and conducting physics experiments in low gravity and hard vacuum. Some experiments, like radio astronomy from the far side, can only be done on the Moon. Eventually, if technology continues advancing, the Moon might host manufacturing facilities producing goods that can't be made on Earth. Low gravity, hard vacuum, and temperature extremes could enable new materials or manufacturing processes. Products might be returned to Earth or used in space for building spacecraft and structures. This industrial vision remains far in the future, dependent on transportation costs dropping substantially and demonstration of valuable products. The Moon might also serve educational purposes. Virtual reality and telepresence could allow students worldwide to experience lunar exploration remotely through robots and cameras. Selected students might eventually visit as part of educational programs, though this is speculative. The Moon as an outdoor classroom, a place where people learn about science, engineering, and working in extreme environments, could inspire generations. Looking even further ahead, some envision the Moon as a stepping stone to the asteroid belt, Jupiter's moons, Saturn, and beyond. Water ice and other lunar resources could fuel spacecraft venturing throughout the solar system. Manufacturing facilities on the Moon could produce spacecraft and components. Crews could train in lunar conditions before embarking on multi-year voyages. The Moon would become the base from which humanity spreads across the solar system. These visions are speculative and distant. Many things must go right for them to materialize. Sustained political and financial support, technological breakthroughs, successful resolution of countless engineering challenges, and no catastrophic failures that derail the enterprise. History suggests that the path forward will involve setbacks, changes in direction, and achievements we haven't yet imagined. What seems clear is that Artemis marks a turning point. Whether humanity becomes a truly spacefaring species or remains primarily bound to Earth will depend significantly on whether Artemis succeeds in its goals. If we can establish sustained presence on the Moon, demonstrating that humans can live and work beyond Earth for extended periods, the pathway to Mars and beyond becomes credible. If Artemis fails or becomes another brief program abandoned after a few missions, the dream of humanity among the stars recedes into uncertainty. The next decade will be crucial. Artemis missions will fly or they won't. Technology will mature or it won't. International cooperation will strengthen or fracture. Costs will prove manageable or prohibitive. Public support will hold or erode. These outcomes aren't predetermined. They depend on thousands of decisions, actions, and efforts by countless individuals. As we close our eyes tonight and drift towards sleep, the Moon continues its ancient orbit, indifferent to human ambitions. But humans aren't indifferent to the Moon. We're drawn to it, preparing to return there, building systems and making plans that could establish our species beyond our home world. The story of Artemis is still being written, and its conclusion, whether triumph or disappointment, will shape humanity's relationship with space for generations to come.